ahead and call the Finance and Planning Committee meeting to order. We will come to order and are convened as of 5:31 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thanks for joining us this evening. Please note that under the current circumstances that have been with us for quite some time here, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors have been and are going to continue being held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. Please visit rtd-denver.com to access meeting recordings and unofficial meeting minutes. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I would ask that you please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute settings on the phone, please press *6. So past the usual formality, buckle up everybody. We've got a lengthy meeting tonight. I would just thank you all in advance for the attendance, the engagement, the discussion. We have a lot of important things to get through. So with that, I will call the attendance for the committee members. Director Broom.
Present.
Committee Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Duchel is absent this evening. He is recovering from COVID. Director Geisinger.
I'm here.
Director Whitmore.
Present.
And I am here. So we have 6 committee members present, 1 absent. I see for the sake of the record that we are also joined by Board Chair Busick, as well as Director Tisdale, Director Williams, and Board Secretary Sloan. Barbara, did I miss anybody that's with us this evening from the board?
I see Director Williams.
Great, Director Williams. Excellent. Thank you very much.
And
all right.
Director Cook, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, yeah, we have Director Williams, Director Cook, Director Tisdale, and Chair Busick here from the rest of the board. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and open the public comment period. So this is going to be a time for anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic that's listed in the published meeting agenda tonight or for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you're dialed in, please press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then please submit your comments in writing instead. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the committee, or if any member of the public would like to submit written comments, please submit an email to the board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. I think you can also Google it and you'll find it pretty quick. During public comment, the committee will not offer comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by please stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. I am not seeing any hands in the queue, but Barbara, do you see anybody that I may not be? Oh, I do see.
Yes, I see Molly McKinley.
Thank you. I just overlooked it. For the sake of the record, I would also note that we are joined by Director Rivera Malpiedi as well. Ms. McKinley, if you will, please go ahead and state your name and comments.
Molly, you're muted.
Okay, I think I'm here, right? Great.
There we are. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks. Good evening, y'all. Molly McKinley. I'm the policy director at the Denver Streets Partnership, and thanks for hosting this opportunity for public comment this evening. I will keep it quick because you do have a very long agenda this evening, but I just wanted to hop on and express support for the IGA for the Zero Fare Ozone Grant Program. You know, we're excited about this program. A month is, of course, a short period of time this year to be doing a program like this, but we think it's a really good opportunity for RTD to be working with folks at the state and within the region to just build some really good faith and excitement around public transit. And we plan on working with our partner organizations to do whatever we can to make sure that it's a successful effort. So just want to encourage you to support that. I know you've all expressed support in previous meetings for this program overall, but just wanted to thank you for that support previously, and hope that you'll support that this evening. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the comment. Barbara, do we see any others in the queue?
I see no other hands up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was notified coming into the meeting that we did not receive any emailed comments for tonight's evening. So therefore, with no other participants in the queue and no other written comments, we will close the comment period at this time. So thank you for the participation. We have no information from external entities this evening. However, moving into recommended actions, we do have 6 recommended actions this evening on the agenda for consideration of the committee. The first recommended action is for the 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report and Report to Governance. This is for the Board of Directors to adopt the Regional Transportation District's Annual Comprehensive Financial Report that includes audited financial reports relating to the year ending in December 31st, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a Director Whitmore as the mover. Did I hear Director Cook as the second? All right. Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, and Byron Atten, the Senior Manager of Accounting, to present the item to the committee. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. I'd like to begin by thanking RTD staff for all of their hard work and long hours completing the audits and preparing the reports. Byron Atten, Senior Manager of Accounting, Tom Barlow, Investment and Debt Accountant, who, by the way, also has 30 plus years with RTD, as well as Mike Finnern, Senior Accountant, led another outstanding effort over the past several months to complete this work. I'd also like to thank Pam Hill, Sean Hickey, Christopher Gilbert, Amy Titar, and their teams from Plant Moran for all of their work. Pam Hill, who is a partner with Plant Moran and led the audit effort from Plant Moran's side for RTD, is joining us this evening to present any findings and make required disclosures to the Finance Committee regarding their audits and reviews. It's been a pleasure working with the Plant Moran team during this process, and RTD very much appreciates their guidance, assistance, and independent review of RTD's financial information. Pam, when you're ready, please go ahead and present.
All right, thank you so much, Doug. Let me share my screen here. All right, let me know if everyone can see this. You can see it? Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much. I am here tonight to talk about the results of the audit for the December 31st, 2021 audit. Before I get into some of the details, I did want to just thank the committee chair Davidson and the committee vice chair Catlin as well. They have spent some time with us going through both the pre-audit and then also the post-audit kind of debrief. So we appreciate their assistance and input in the audit process. Also, I wanted to thank Deborah, Doug, Byron, Tom, and really the whole team. I would echo Doug's sentiment. You know, I think this was our second year doing the audit for RTD, and we were really able to build a lot of synergies off of year one here. In year two, we saw efficiencies, I think, on both ends. We did spend over about 800 hours auditing the books and records of RTD. And let me flip to this next slide here. With that, we issued several different reports. And so in your packet tonight, not only should you have this presentation, but you also have the 120-ish page plus financial statements that I'm sure you've all read cover to cover. But we are just going to kind of talk about some of the highlights today. I think probably the biggest highlight to cover is the fact that once again, RTD received an unmodified opinion. Basically, what that means is that you can rely on the financial statements and the numbers as they are stated within the financial statements. We aren't going to go into a lot of details on the numbers today. I know Doug and his team provide you, updates monthly on all of those numbers, and at this point they're about 6 months old. So, but we are happy to answer any questions if you do have anything on those. The other deliverables is the end of audit letter, which we will go through over the next few slides. And then the single audit report, which is the audit of the spending of federal dollars. We will cover the dollars spent in a few slides, but I am happy to report that related to the federal awards audit, we did not have any findings. So not only did we not have any internal control findings, but we also did not have any compliance findings. And we'll get a little more into the specifics of what we tested and in the COVID dollars tested in a few slides. But that's something I think as a committee and board members, you should feel very good about those results. Also, we issue some procedures surrounding the general manager's contract, and those reports have been completed. And then lastly, reporting that RTD does for the National Transit Base database. We are pretty close to wrapping up those procedures, and we will be hopefully finalizing those over the next few weeks here. So quite a bit that goes into that audit. If you recall, at the beginning of the audit, we have some discussions with the committee chair and vice chair, but then we also send a letter out to the entire board that talks about what our plan for the audit is. These next couple slides are going to summarize the end of audit letter, which is basically a follow-up to that pre-audit letter, and covers how our audit went. Did we have any deviations from that plan that we laid out originally? What the next couple slides are going to say is basically we did not deviate from our plan, but I did want to kind of take you through some highlights. So as part of the audit process, we have to plan for the audit, and we brainstorm around areas where there could be potential risks. And so a couple of those related to refinancing debt, which the district did during the fiscal year we audited. And then also just a large amount of COVID-19 funding that was both received and spent during the fiscal year. So we designed additional procedures around those areas, and we are happy to report to the committee that we did not have any findings as a result of these additional procedures. Next, just talks a little bit, this slide talks a little bit about what our responsibilities are under the professional standards, that we provided an opinion on the fairness of the financial statements. And again, as I mentioned, that was an unmodified opinion. Our scope and timing of the audit was followed in what we had laid out in the pre-audit. We did not run into any issues in terms of meeting the deadlines that were laid out at the beginning of the audit. And we also didn't notice any significant changes in accounting practices or policies at the district during the year. Next, we are just required to make the committee aware that there are some significant estimates that are reported within the district's financial statements. So obviously the two biggest ones being the useful lives of the capital assets. As you know, your infrastructure is a very big part of the district's financial statements, and then also the net pension liabilities, which we'll take a look at in a few slides. Whenever there are significant accounting estimates, we are required to take a look and test the pieces that make up those estimates, so the assumptions that are used, and get comfortable with the reasonableness and the consistency of those assumptions. And we were able to get comfortable with those and are reporting back to you that those numbers were free of material misstatement. Next, just some other required communications, nothing significant to report here. Again, just a follow up from the initial letter, we didn't have any difficulties encountered in the audit and so on. Next, in that end of audit letter that you would have received in your packet, we do provide a section just on some legislative and informational items. We have covered these with detail, in detail with management, so I wasn't planning on going through these items in any detail today, but happy to take any questions that the committee might have. Like I said, there's just additional resources and items, kind of food for thought for both the committee and management related to upcoming accounting standards and just other legislative items that are on the horizon. Lastly, it wouldn't be an accounting presentation with a couple numbers, so we had to put a few things in here. I really just wanted to focus for a minute or two on the two pension plans. So this first one is the ATU plan. You'll notice on the far right column is the funded percentage. And so you can see the strides that the district has made over the last 5 years in terms of the funding percentage. We've been able to increase that from 35.9% up to 55.8%. So you continue to make strides in terms of funding the ATU plan. Then the next slide just takes a look at the salaried plan. This one is actually very consistent over the 5 years and really a pretty well-funded plan. I think a lot of times when we're looking at various pension plans, kind of the benchmark is between 70 and 80%, and that's right where this plan would lie. So very, very well positioned plan. And then lastly, wanted to talk a little bit, I mentioned earlier about the spending of the federal dollars during the fiscal year 2021. You'll see that in fiscal year 2021, the district spent about $313 million in federal dollars. You'll notice kind of that drop from 2020. And really the reason for that was in 2020 and prior, the TIFIA bonds that you had taken out several years ago were considered to be federal dollars on your single audit. And so with the refinancing of those TIFIA bonds and the removal of some of those federal requirements, they're no longer required to be audited or tested with the federal spending. So pretty much over 99%, not quite 100%, but 99 point something of all your federal dollars spent this year were under the federal transit cluster, and we tested the federal transit cluster. So of that $313 million, about $299 million was COVID money that was spent from the district in fiscal year 2021. So again, we definitely tested the compliance with those COVID dollars. And again, happy to report that there were no findings related to the spending of those dollars. So that was all I had planned to cover. I know that was pretty quick, but I've heard you have a long agenda. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have on the committee through the chair. And I thank you guys for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Hill. Appreciate the presentation. Mr. McLeod, were there any further comments you wanted to make from staff prior to opening the floor for questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll hold my questions and comments for the end here, and we'll open the floor for any discussion questions. Director Broom, I see your hand is up first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had a question on the table that you showed for the ATU pension funding. It shows that at the end of 2021, we were funded at 55.8%. There's been a subsequent event. There's been a substantial amount of money that's been put into that fund that came from the COVID funding. Is that subsequent event somehow disclosed in the financial statements?
I believe, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that happened after we issued the financial statements.
It's actually
dated.
Yeah, sorry. We did include that as a subsequent event since the contract was ratified prior to the issuance of the audit opinion, which was dated May 23rd. So we did ratify the contract. We do have a subsequent event included in the footnotes of the financial statements regarding the collective bargaining agreement. And to your point, that graphic did not show the additional funding and the changes to the pension on the ATU side that occurred subsequent to the measurement date of December 31st, 2021 for this fiscal period.
If I might ask then, what did the 55.8% go up to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may answer that one.
Please, yes.
We are working with our actuaries. So the ATU has a trust that manages the pension plan. It's an ATU Pension Trust made up of 3 RTD members and an alternate, as well as 3 ATU members and an alternate. We've asked the actuary that works for that trust to rerun the numbers with this $160 million contribution, as well as the retroactive change in the vesting to employees that were hired from 2011 forward from a 1% per year vesting up to 2%. They're going through those numbers currently. We have them scheduled to come to the board to give an update on those both pension plans, both ATU pension plan and the salaried pension plan. Both actuaries will come and give an update. We don't know what those numbers look like yet, but we will have those in September at the latest.
Thank you. That's the only question I had.
Thank you, Director Broom. Appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. McLeod. We expect some good news there, which is good. Director Cook, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just a point of clarification. We didn't use the stimulus funds, correct? Just Melanie Snyder or Doug McLeod. We used funds that were freed up or the increase in sales tax that we saw or something, correct? We didn't use the stimulus funds to shore up that pension plan.
Correct. Yes, this is Doug McLeod. So yes, correct. So we did have excess sales and use tax funding for that. All of the stimulus funding that was provided was drawn using eligible expenditures, which is one of the items that Plant Moran's team verified. So we had to spend the funding first. Plant Moran also verified that the funding that we did apply towards that grant, which was primarily salaries and wages of employees, and purchase transportation, which is our contract cost for fixed route services, as well as some fuel. We use those expenditures to draw down the COVID funding.
Super. Thank you very much.
If I might, that's like a Texas two-step. I mean, that's where the funds came from in order to free up the other funds to make that payment. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Broom, and thank you, Director Cook, for the clarification on that. It's a very important distinction. I actually have a related question that Committee Vice Chair Catlin and I had the opportunity to hear a little bit about from Plant Moran in our preparatory meeting. But Ms. Hill, I'm wondering if you can just comment. I know the COVID relief funds were fairly unprecedented in magnitude, in their timeliness, a whole variety of things. I know you mentioned that there were some different processes that were put in place. I'm wondering if you just wouldn't mind clicking into that a little bit and describing some of the methodology for the committee of how you evaluated the use of federal funds.
Sure. Yep. Not a problem. So we actually, when we do the testing for the federal awards, it's actually a pretty prescribed thing. They don't give us a lot of latitude in terms of determining our sample sizes and things like that. So we take a look at the population as a whole, and then based on what that population is made up of, that determines our sample size. So I believe approximately 299 million was COVID funding out of the 313. So the majority of our sample that we selected for testing for allowability purposes did relate to, as Mr. McLeod said, it did relate to how the district spent those federal dollars. So it's almost like a mathematical equation that we would use in terms of allocating the sample sizes. So the sample size that we tested was definitely heavily weighted towards the spending of the COVID funds.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on that. I appreciate it. I would note too, just with that clarification of the use of funds, we did have a sizable, and thank you, Director Cook, for pointing out the change in sales tax. While 2020 was down 4.1%, I am struck by looking at our financial report that sales tax is up over 19%. While fair revenue continues to stay at a low level, we're up over 2020 and we're up over 2019 without the grants, with just looking at fair plus sales tax revenue. It's an interesting position. So I think that did allow us to free up some funds, which is good. Any other questions from members of the board? Any other discussion items? Yes, Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thanks, and I think it's implied, but those that influx of COVID funds is temporary only, and we need to make sure that when we communicate to our other stakeholders that they understand that that's not going to be sustained, that we will be leveling off in our funding most likely.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate it. Absolutely temporary one-off. And along those lines, I'd commend the team. I mean, now that we have, our audited report here, I'm struck by the fact that we've increased our net position, decreased our debt, coming out of what was an extremely difficult time when fair revenues were at half. And so leveraging those funds for qualified expenses, which very happy to hear that, we had no findings in that regard. I think we've done a heck of a job, we RTD, at improving our position and stabilizing our position in what was a difficult time. It's not clear, what the next couple of years hold. I think we could probably all take guesses with our crystal balls, but I appreciate the fact that, even just $110,000 boost in our net position as opposed to going the other direction is very positive. And I certainly don't want to get out in front of the news of the actuaries, and be guessing here, but I think what we did on the pension plan, we made some smart moves. So thank you to the team for that. And Plant Moran, thank you for the evaluation here, and certainly no findings is absolutely reassuring to this committee. Any further questions, discussion? All right, excellent. So at this time, I will ask directors to vote on the action. We're going to do this the way we've been doing things. I'm going to ask if there's any no votes on the action. So any no votes at this time? Being none, I have 6 yeses and 1 absent, so the motion passes. Thank you very much. We are going to move to our second recommended action. Once again, thank you, Ms. Hill and Plant Moran, for being here. Our second recommended action is the 2022 amended budget. This is for the Board of Directors to adopt resolution to amend and appropriate funds to increase our 2022 amended budget by $79.7 million to $105.5 million. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Shelley Cook.
Second.
But I have the mover as Director Cook, the second is Director Geisinger. Thank you very much. I'm going to again call on Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, and in this case, Todd Nichols, Senior Manager of Budget, to present this item to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Just a few comments before we get into the presentation. In November 2021, the board approved the 2022 proposed budget. That fiscal year budget appropriation process relies on certain assumptions and estimates at the time of passage. After 7 months have passed since approval of that 2022 budget, staff is requesting the Finance Committee and board approve certain adjustments to that budget for the remainder of 2022 to align authorized expenditures with changes that have occurred during 2022 and in keeping with strategic plan priorities. So in your packet, we provided details of each of those changes and also provided a board resolution for approval, which officially appropriates those funding changes for the 2022 amended budget. I'm joined by Todd Nickel, who's our Senior Manager of Budget, and again, want to recognize Todd as well as Heidi Wagner is our Senior Manager of Finance, and their teams for developing the 2022 budget. So I have this short presentation I'd like to go through, which summarizes the budgetary changes, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions that may come up. So I'll share my screen. Mr. Chair, can you see the presentation? Great, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay. So just a reminder that the purpose of the amended budget is to continue to restrict expenditures to authorized uses, those uses being authorized by the board through their appropriation process. So we want to adjust our current fiscal year budget, the 22 budget, by amending it to adjust for new information and needs going forward. And just as a reminder, staff, we have budgetary controls in place which only allow staff to make expenditures from which the board appropriated and in the proper categories, which is why we're coming to you asking for these adjustments at this point in time. So what are the key fiscal changes that have occurred since that budget was approved in November of last year? We have a new sales and use tax forecast that the CU School of Business, Lead School of Business presented to the board in March. So that updated forecast actually is an increase to sales and use tax numbers. So we want to reflect those in this revised budget or amended budget. And we have some reallocation of operating expenses and increases for critical needs. And then finally, we do have some adjustments to state of good repair, and I'll touch on each of those main items in further slides. So just summarizing those changes, the sales and use tax forecast from Lead School of Business increased the forecast for 2022 by $30.7 million. Through April, which we've just received numbers through April, and we'll provide those in the monthly financial status report with the briefings for this month. We have seen a very nice return in terms of sales and use tax collections over and above what was forecasted in the previous forecast by CU Leads back in November. So they revised their forecast, gave us an update with an additional projected $30.7 million for the 2022 fiscal year. Changes to operating expenses net to $4.9 million. That includes a $9.3 million reduction in purchase transportation. What we're doing there is we're recognizing some of the savings that have occurred to date and just putting those back into the unrestricted fund. We have a $1 million reduction in the 2021 expense carry forward. The expense carry forwards are projects expense, not capital, but operating expense projects that were underway. They got carried forward to the current year. As we've reviewed those, we were able to reduce that funding by $1 million. We have a $1.2 million increase for additional headcount and overtime. And I would mention that of that $1.2 million, the overtime is $160,000, and it's all related to non-represented or salaried staff, primarily in the security area. So we have overtime of $160,000 plus another $1.1 million in additional headcount, primarily related to additional security staffing, as well as some safety personnel. $2.9 million for the general manager contingency fund. In the appropriation each year, we ask the board to appropriate $5 million to the general manager for unforeseen circumstances that arise to be used at her discretion within the threshold that she has the ability to allocate or appropriate budget transfers. So we're restoring the $5 million in contingency funds by adding $2.9 million back. That $2.9 million was used for several items that weren't budgeted in the original budget. Examples might include the boiler replacement, which was a large project, other things like that, which we don't foresee at the time of the original preparation, but need immediate fixes for during the budget year without going through an extensive process of trying to get those funding through individual amendments. And then finally, $1.3 million for adjustments to various expense accounts. There's several small changes that are listed within attachment A in your package, and you can see those, and we'd be happy to address any of those that you might have additional questions on. That covers operating expense changes of $4.9 million. Our capital expenditures, we'd like to increase that by $5.9 million in 2022. Each of these items are items that were already in the asset management plan, but they were scheduled for future years. The need has become more critical, so we're asking to bring that funding forward to the current fiscal year. of $5.9 million through this amendment. That includes $1.4 million for digital video recorders for our fixed route services, $0.6 million for wheel hoists to be used in the bus maintenance area, and then $3.9 million for the East Metro roof replacement. So a total of $5.9 million on capital expenditures. The other thing we don't have at the time of the proposed budget in November is the capital carry forward, because we're bringing that proposed budget in November. We need to finish out the fiscal year to see what's actually been completed, and then we reconcile what capital projects have not been completed and the amounts that were previously appropriated for those capital projects by the board, and bring those forward as a carry forward into the current fiscal year. After doing that reconciliation, there was approximately $62.0 million that need to be carried forward that wasn't originally appropriated. So it's not new capital expenditures, it's just moving from one fiscal year to the next. And then finally, an increase of $6.8 million to the unrestricted fund. So after we make all these changes, what's left over after the $30.7 million additional, we have an additional $6.8 million that we will let fall into the unrestricted fund to be used at a later time. A couple of items that don't necessarily go through expenses, but they're balance sheet items that I'd like to point out to the board that we're asking for appropriation is we have two liabilities that we need to get settled as an agency. One of those being we will get the credit risk premium return from the RIF loan. That's in process. RTD has received a letter from the U.S. Department of Transportation to provide information, including banking information, so that U.S. DOT can return that approximately $30 million in funding plus interest to RTD. Once RTD receives that money, the agreement with City and County of Denver is City and County of Denver gets 50% of that return of the credit risk premium, because they were part of the DUSPA build out. So Denver Union Station Project Authority did the whole build down there at Denver Union Station. They were part of that funding mechanism. So we agreed to split the return of the credit risk premium 50% with City and County of Denver. In order to facilitate that payment, we're just asking for the appropriation to give them approximately $18 million, which I don't know what the final number is. It's $30 million to start plus interest. So we're asking for up to $18 million to return to City and County of Denver once we receive that refund. And then finally, we also have an IGA left over from the Eagle project, in which City and County of Denver had advanced tax collections from the P3 vendor. So essentially what happened is when RTD put out the RFP in 2010 for the Eagle project, the winning bid had not contemplated that they would be required to pay local taxes, local sales and use taxes. It was understood that they want to pay sales taxes for the state or RTD, but any local taxes was not contemplated in their bid. RTD ended up reimbursing the vendor for those sales taxes incurred. And because funding was tight at that point in time, City and County of Denver, who collected those sales taxes, agreed to advance those tax collections to RTD to help get through the building process, at which point in time through this IGA, RTD would return that funding, advance funding to the City and County of Denver. That total is $8.7 million. We now have the ability to do that within our budgetary constraints. So we're also asking to reduce that liability on our balance sheet by paying what's owed to City and County of Denver. And in fact, they've been very gracious. That was supposed to be paid when the project was open for revenue service in 2016. So because of our financial constraints, they've allowed us to continue on with this for several years. But I'd like to go ahead and have RTD pay that to them. So to summarize, we have a $30.7 million increase in revenue in the amended budget, operating expense increase of $4.9 million, capital expenditures for new items, $5.9 million, capital carry forward is $62 million, and then a $6.8 million contribution to the unrestricted fund, which is not an expenditure, it's just moving it into savings. So total appropriation of $79.7 million. Final slide is just upcoming, what to expect. So we have budgets upcoming. So in July of 2022, we will be giving the Finance Committee an update on the new midterm financial plan, which would incorporate the 2022 amended budget plus the next 6 years of forecast. We won't have all those numbers for the July meeting, but we'll be able to give some thoughts as to what we're seeing leading up to the presentation and approval of the MTFP in September at the Finance Committee. And then finally, we'll be presenting the 2023 proposed budget for approval in November. We will have some discussions leading up to that too, to also set the stage from what we're seeing from an economic perspective. Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments, and Todd and I are available for any questions. Thank you.
Doug, Mr. McLeod, thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
appreciate it. And at this time, I'll ask directors who have any questions or discussion items to please raise their virtual hand. Being no questions, I'll ask one I know that came up in our discussion. I just was wondering if you might click in a little bit more on the carry forward, given that's 62 and, you know, sizable chunk of this. And I know that's been kind of moving forward. Can you click into, you know, what that's representative of, and if there's ways we can get some refined visibility on that as we work towards the midterm financial plan, since that's the more sizable adjustment here.
Yes, and thank you for that question. There, within the packet, there is a Schedule C that lists all of the capital projects that are included in the budget, including the capital carry forward. So that schedule can be referred to for a detailed list. Some of the larger items are some of the replacements that we have going in, as well as some infrastructure projects that have been ongoing to continue to replace those. That funding was available in previous budgets, and so that money has already been set aside and designated for that purpose. We'll continue to reconcile that. One of the efforts we've been taking over the past year too is to also refine the asset management plan, which goes hand in hand with the capital expenditures and capital carry forward, making sure that we have reconciled both those two databases, both in terms of completeness as well as timing of when those items are scheduled to occur. We do have additional work to do in aligning some of those projects with the strategic plan. I believe there's some opportunities probably to reduce and make more efficient the direction of that large expenditure on the capital side to align with the strategic plan. So I do believe we'll see some changes over time, especially with the midterm financial plan, as we get a little bit more mature in our asset inventory as well as information.
Okay, yeah, thanks for commenting on that. And I think the second part of what you said is really important, just whether you're feeling that that's, you know, an up or a down. So I appreciate the comments on that and realize that, you know, we have some work to do to align that. But yeah, thank you. And Director Whitmore, I see that you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doug, just for the record, our net of the credit risk premium after we settle up with our partners, especially in Denver, what is that net going to be, or a close approximation?
Thank you for the question. So the actual credit risk premium that was paid was $29.8 million. What the U.S. Department of Transportation agreed to was to pay us interest, and that actually was paid, I believe it was 2014 timeframe. So it's been several years, almost been a decade that credit risk premium was paid. The Department of Transportation, in paying that back, will calculate interest for each year on that outstanding balance while they were holding that funding before they returned it. I don't have a great way of estimating what interest rate they're going to use. I'm not sure what they use. So the way I came up with 18 million, which is half of approximately 36, so I'm assuming up to 36 million. I don't think it'll be that much, but I wanted to, err on the side of caution with the appropriation. That's assuming 2% interest per year since that credit risk premium was paid. So I seriously doubt with the low interest rate environment over the last 10 years that's what we'll get back. If I had to guess, it's probably going to be closer to $32 million once we see the final number. But through our general manager, we'll communicate what that final number is once we see the money come through. And they will calculate that at the day that they send it back to us, the interest.
So if I may continue, Mr. Chair, we subtract the
Please.
18 million. Does that get us close? That was my interpretation, but I just wanted to verify that.
Sorry, yeah, what I was assuming, so I was assuming it could be up to 36 million, which 50% of that with interest, we would return half of that 18 million back to to City and County Denver. It's more likely to be a gross of probably 32 million, and we return 16. Whatever the number is, we'll return 50% of that.
Okay, fair enough for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Whitmore. Director Cook, please.
Yeah, thanks. And that sparked another question. We're using the CRP to make the changes at Union Station that we've identified for safety and security. Are we, and I think I saw that was 10 to 15 million. Is that number correct? Is my memory correct about that, first of all? And is Denver participating in that at all? Is it just on our portion of it, or is Denver sharing the cost there?
Ms. Johnson, I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on that. I'm smiling because that question came up from Committee Vice Chair Catlin in our prep meeting. So thank you for asking the question here. And Ms. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that, please.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Chair Davidson, and thank you very much, Director Cook, for the question. So it's a two-pronged answer. There was a meeting that occurred with the City and County of Denver's Police Department, I want to say 2 months ago, in which they do have some ARPA funds that are dedicated specifically towards enhancing areas that may have a propensity for criminal activity. So there are some funds that they are working on providing to us in relationship to mitigating some elements around Denver Union Station. Secondly, to your question, as it relates to the credit risk premium, discussions have ensued in relationship to them supporting some elements of our crime prevention through environmental design. So we do not have a number, recognizing that we are scoping out what this could be going forward, but discussions have ensued about both sides having skin in the game in reference to providing enhancements for the betterment of the environment holistically.
Thank you, Director Cook, for the question. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for commenting on it. Yeah, the DUS improvements and the security enhancements, be interested to hear what numbers may come out of that. And yeah, thanks again for the question and discussion. Other questions from directors? Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. I certainly look forward to the midterm financial plan. And again, as we talked about in the last section, I think we're in decent shape, which is saying a lot given what we've been through. So appreciate the clarity on the adjustment to the budget here. So we'll do this again with asking for no votes. So at this time, I will ask the directors, are there any no votes on this action? Being none, the motion will pass with 6 yeses and 1 absent. Director Deschel being the absent. All right, we're going to go ahead. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. We're going to go ahead and move to the third recommended action this evening, one that is quite important. I imagine we'll have some discussion on. This is regarding the internal audit contract. This is for the Board of Directors to authorize the General Manager and CEO or her designee to enter into a contract with Reuben Brown for internal audit services for 3 base years and 2 option years with a total not to exceed contract value of $3,212,106. Now I will go ahead and ask, is there a motion?
So moved.
Director Catlin, move. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Director Whitmore. Thank you very much. Having the motion and second, we'll move into the presentation. I would like to ask the committee to please indulge me this evening, as I would like to present this item. I've prepared some remarks and just want to make some comments for consideration of my committee members, and then I will open the floor first to any members attending from the Audit Ad Hoc Committee, which in this case includes Chair of that committee, Catlin. Unfortunately, this evening, Director Deschel is absent due to illness. So I'm going to go ahead and just walk through this a little bit, what we're doing, and just a little bit of background here. There's a lot more background in the packet. So as the committee will recall, last year we reviewed 2 different reports that were provided to this board regarding our internal audit function and its performance, one being the audit by the Colorado Office of the State Auditor, and the other being a peer review by the American Public Transportation Association. Without recounting all the details here, which I'm sure we all recall, and I would note are on record, it was abundantly clear that action was needed for us to correct the performance of our internal audit function. In my view, this is urgent and important for us to establish a strong internal audit function and a strong audit committee on the board of directors, given the historical findings of weakness in this area, which extend beyond a decade. As we're aware, as set forth by the Institute of Internal Auditors, or IIA, the internal audit must enhance and protect organizational value by providing risk-based, objective assurance, advice, and insight. With 15 board members, I suspect there are 15 nuanced and varied views about the top risks to this agency. However, I also suspect that there's a fair amount of consensus as well. It is paramount that we have an internal audit function to turn to as we highlight those risks and seek to address those risks, as well as paramount to have an internal audit function that can turn to us and highlight risks that the board may have not seen or known. In June 2021, Director Catlin, then chair of the then Finance Administration and Audit Committee, and I began to engage with staff to outline a scope of work to engage a firm to further review those reports and produce recommendations to the board. As we all know, we collaborated on the scope of work and ultimately procured the services of Reuben Brown. Additionally, in July 2021, the board approved a new internal audit charter that better aligned with the standards of the IIA that Director Catlin and I had collaborated with staff on, including our former manager of IT in internal audit, who has since retired. Reuben Brown then provided a report to this board that included a key recommendation that the board outsource its internal audit function. There were many reasons for this. I'd like to highlight one key reason that personally was of interest and concern to me that I had about our insourced internal audit function, and that is that an outsourced firm can offer us a broader and more immediate bench of experience ranging from IT and security expertise, as well as financial and broader audit expertise that may take longer and be more costly to secure than full-time equivalent hires. Since that time, the Audit Ad Hoc Committee appointed by Chair Busick began to engage with staff to create a scope of work for outsourced internal audit services. One thing I want to note this evening is that recognizing that this board will need to establish a permanent audit committee to serve the board, the Audit Ad Hoc Committee, including Directors Catlin, Director Deschelle, and myself, ensure that the scope of work would also call for the outsourced firm to assist. That's too bad. Thank you for letting me know. It's good to know. Is this any better?
You weren't breaking up.
I hear you clearly.
You were fine on my end too.
You're intermittently breaking up. I'm not. Okay.
Did I hear correctly that my fellow directors can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it. I think the issue may be on your end if I'm coming through clearly to everyone else. I know I've got quite a few comments here, but I promise I'm working my way through here. So it was very important that we establish that the outsourced firm would actually collaborate with the Audit Ad Hoc Committee to actually provide guidance and assistance for the formation of an audit committee and its respective audit charter. So we're getting close to where we are right now. In February 2022, staff issued a request for proposal for internal audit services. This RFP included the scope of work that I just alluded to that has been discussed and arrived at in collaboration with the Audit Ad Hoc Committee. I'd like to call attention to this scope of work now, starting on packet page 170. And please note that this is extracted from RFP number 122D0004, which includes other details, including the form of contract in Part 4, which contains the terms and conditions for any awarded contract. The scope of work includes 3 tasks for one ongoing activity. These are as follows, and I want to especially highlight task 2 because it's going to require quite a bit of board engagement. So the first task is to establish an internal audit team. This is a task that will be established fairly quickly by the firm within 1 week. The firm will assign a single point of contact as a chief audit executive who will be overseeing our internal audit function, as well as the core audit team that will be assigned to RTD. The second task is an important one for us to note as board members. This is to assist with establishment of an independent RTD audit committee. This is a task that will involve our collaboration at the board level. Ultimately, the RTD Board of Directors will need to own the establishment of an audit committee and its audit committee charter. As per the IIA standards, the audit committee will provide the oversight of governance, risk management, and internal control practices. The Audit Ad Hoc Committee will engage with our contracted firm to develop the Audit Committee charter and to form the Audit Committee with consideration of leading practices. I would emphasize that we can take the input as consideration. However, it will be the responsibility of the Board of Directors to ultimately form that Audit Committee and its charter. The Ad Hoc Audit Committee, I know I speak for myself personally as well as other members of the committee that we have a number of questions as well as direction for the firm regarding this second task. I'd like to note that there are standards that we must comply with, and there are also additionally guidelines that we can take into consideration. There are multiple solutions to the problem that we're facing, so collaboration between Reuben Brown, if they are selected this evening as the firm, and the RTD board will be very important. It is critically important that the board own this creation. I believe that we need to set a frequent cadence if we move forward with this recommended action of the Audit Ad Hoc Committee as the board engages with the firm on task 2. The to-be-formed audit committee will ultimately have all accountability to oversee the internal audit function. Therefore, it is urgent and important for the board to get this right. Finally, the third task is to provide record-keeping, tracking, and reporting processes. Our prior record-keeping, tracking, and reporting has been a significant concern of mine since joining this board, as well as a number of my colleagues I know on this board. So we look forward to performing that task. And the ongoing activity is really where the rubber meets the road. That's the internal audit services. The firm will perform the duties of the internal audit function, reporting into the to-be-formed audit committee of the board. I would note for my colleagues here that the board has numerous interactions and intersections with internal audit, given that it functionally reports to the board. I'd personally be happy to walk any board member through my current understanding of the IIA standards and what board role, if any, is specified for each attribute standard and each performance standard, be it oversight, approval, or other, as well as what the minimum cadence is specified. For example, some standards specify at least a minimum of annual reporting to the board. Personally, however, I would note that I'm interested in expediently reviewing and refining these understandings with the guidance of an expert firm. So this is how we arrive at this evening. Our recommended action is to engage with Reuben Brown for 3 base years and 2 option years. Reuben Brown was selected by an evaluation committee comprised of 3 external independent members with audit expertise, 2 RTD employees, and observation by Audit Ad Hoc Committee Chair Peggy Catlin, who may want to comment on this at the end of my remarks. The proposals were evaluated according to weightings provided in the packet, 40% for qualifications of key individuals, 25% for overall experience, 10% of the small business enterprise goal that we established, 25% for cost. If approved, we'll move forward with 3 years with 2 option years. I will now open the floor at long last to discussion for fellow directors, but first I would like to call upon Audit Ad Hoc Committee member Catlin, if you would like to add some additional comments and perhaps elaborate on the observation process that you were privy to.
Thank you, Chair Davidson, and thank you for a very, very thorough and clear outline of how we got here. I'd first like to say that I was very comfortable with the RFP, with the scope and terms and the scope of work. And we were able to review that and we were able to comment on that. So I was comfortable with the terms and conditions, and the scope of work. I also want to say that I was comfortable with my observations of the proposal review with our independent outside audit experts. Their comments demonstrated thorough and knowledgeable evaluations. And it was clear to me at the end of the day, when they had reached consensus on the recommendation of Reuben Brown, that that was a very wise choice. And I would like to add that although I was an observer, end quote, I was very much interested in the discussion and was able to ask questions and participate in the discussion during that time period. But I was pleased with the results and am in favor of moving this recommendation forward. That said, I think that there are some questions that we have regarding processes that we would maybe like to discuss moving forward on other engagements, but this one in particular, I'm comfortable with at this point. I believe Chair Davidson said that it's urgent and important that we strengthen the internal audit function and strengthen the internal audit committee, which currently does not exist. But I'm very anxious to get going with our outside audit consultant and really look forward to a kickoff meeting. I wholeheartedly agree with Chair Davidson about the emphasis on task 2 of the scope. In addition to the 3 ad hoc audit committee members, I also ask many of you, as can, participate to attend those meetings, and as Director Davidson described, in a fairly regular cadence, because the task 2 is so important. So further to emphasize that, audit function has to be owned by the board, and it's important that we get this right. So with that, I look forward to a very, very aggressive schedule to get this going, because quite frankly, we've waited far too long over the last decade to get this thing right. So thank you for the opportunity to make these comments. And again, I'm very comfortable with where we are right now.
Thank you very, very much for the comments, Director Catlin. Very much appreciated. I'll go ahead and open the floor for discussion.
Excuse me, I forgot to add one point. I had a long discussion with Director Deschel about where we were in the process, and Director Davidson and I had several long discussions about this process as we moved forward to tonight. And when I had a conversation with Director Deschel, he was very supportive of the approach that we were taking. And that was prior to him contracting COVID. I was not surprised to hear of his illness, as he told me at that time that his wife was suffering from COVID at the time. So we certainly miss him tonight and wish him well, but he was very comfortable with our collective approach to this process. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that additional comment. We definitely wish him well. I had the pleasure of speaking with him today, and I know he needs some rest and recovery. So thank you for the comments on that. I'm going to go ahead and call on directors now. Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about the cost involved. The 3.2 million that was quoted in the memorandum, is that per year, or is that for the 3 base years?
Director Catlin or Mr. McLeod, could you comment and clarify on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Doug McLeod. So the $3.2 million would be the total 5-year contract. It approximates just under $700,000 per year for 12 months of work. That's based, if I recall correctly, on approximately, I believe it was 15 to 20, maybe it's 10 to 15 audits. They've scheduled it out based on the number of audits they would anticipate completing based on the direction from the audit committee.
Thank you for commenting on that, Mr. McLeod, and thank you for the question, Director Broom. And so that's actually one of the reasons that this is here, is adding those 2 option years for approval while we're at this, hence the total number. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Thank you, Director Broom. Director Broom, does that answer your question? Any further comments on this?
No, I have no further comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Director Cook, please.
Yeah, thanks. So both the 2010 audit and the 2020 audit and the peer group had emphasized the need for independence. And part of that was, establishing the functional relationship with the board. And to the extent that we're hiring this group to both set up the function and to carry out to provide the services on an ongoing basis, and the board and certainly the board as a whole, but the ad hoc committee members were excluded from having a part in the selection. You were observers, didn't have a role in actually making the selection. I'm worried that we've somehow violated that principle from the get-go. And I don't want to trip it up. I agree with you about the need to move forward expeditiously. We need this function. But are there ways that this contract, what does this look like so that it truly is board managed and not responsive so much to the staff members who are overseeing the contract and who identified the people who would be the recipients of the contract? How do we assure that in the ways that you operate?
Thank you very much for the question, Director Cook. I very much appreciate the sentiment of this, given the importance of the functional reporting to the board. I want to just make a few comments, and then if General Counsel Snyder is available to comment on some procurement practices, I'd welcome her input as well. I think the first thing I'd like to address is one of the most material parts of the question, which is how do we ensure that the board is managing this and moving forward? And for that, I would emphasize the importance of having an audit committee in the long term that reports into the board on a regular basis, and then to whom the chief audit executive, be them insourced, outsourced, or co-sourced, are reporting into. The chief audit executive, in reading through the standards, has a relatively, I hesitate to use the word and be overly dramatic, but sacred role in that they have a fair amount of independence from all parts of the organization, but then report into the board as part of maintaining that independence. One of the key questions that I have with an outsourced function in the absence of having an audit committee that I intend to ask whichever firm we onboard here is actually how we immediately establish procedures, standard operating procedures for reporting structures. This may be a loose term, but in my view, the audit ad hoc committee is almost serving as a sort of interim. And so we immediately need, as we're building the plane and flying it, we're building the audit function and its committee, but we're also performing internal audit. We immediately need to establish a cadence for internal audit to report on at least the basis that the standards call for in terms of presenting their findings, the risk plan, the risk-based assessment, all of these types of things. So I think thing one is that we need to establish the cadence of flying the plane while we're building it, that we would have the firm reporting into the audit ad hoc committee, and then the to be formed audit committee. Also, I think this is the importance of task two, and why I would propose that the board, particularly the ad hoc committee, be aggressive with setting a frequent cadence of meetings during I believe it's specified as 8 weeks in the scope of work, of receiving advice and guidance on the formation of an audit committee. To be clear, that's not its formation. That's the advice and guidance that this board can take into consideration. So I think it's important for us to drive agendas, meetings, and so forth to have those. Regarding the procurement process, I think the first part of your question, certainly I'm not the best to comment on the legal ramifications of what you're bringing up. I think it's a good question. What I would say is at the ad hoc committee, and I can speak for myself personally, that I was a lot more focused on the what and less on the who. So we dialed in on that scope of work, understood the importance of some of the tasks, particularly the assistance in forming the audit committee in the long term, and then went through a procurement process through staff. But in this case, it included 3 external members for evaluation of those firms, whose expertise certainly I felt comfortable deferring to in terms of the selecting the who to do the what that the ad hoc committee had agreed upon. So that's probably the extent to which I can comment on, our procedures as they relate to procurement. I'd like to open the floor both to the chair of the ad hoc committee, Catlin, as well as General Counsel Snyder, who I see has turned on her camera. I'll start with General Counsel Snyder, if you wouldn't mind commenting on the procurement process, anything I may have missed, and anything that may be useful in addressing Director Cook's questions and concerns.
you, Chair Davidson. This is Melanie Snyder, General Counsel. And no, I won't, you did not leave anything out of the procurement process. You know, we, as you said, developed that scope of work based on input from APTA and based on input from the experts that RTD retained. And it was also based on the RTD board approved internal audit charter. So that wasn't done in a vacuum. It was done with a significant amount of process and input. And certainly the competitive selection process, it was an open and competitive solicitation with multiple vendors that did provide bids. And in addition to the regular internal controls that we have with our procurement procedures, we did add some supplemental procedures. For example, adding Director Catlin as an observer, just to have another set of eyes on the process, and having 2 external experts also serving on the panel. So at this, I don't have any concerns about the independence of that process. And really, we're at the very nascent stages of this engagement. This is, you know, we have selected a vendor, but most of the work still remains ahead of us. And that really is going to all be based on recommendations that come from this expert, who ultimately will make recommendations to the ad hoc committee and then to the board for final approval. So I think there are substantial controls that are in place already. And I guess I will note, you know, we don't like to start talking about a contract by talking about the opportunities to terminate, but you should know that our contracts do always allow RTD to terminate for convenience. This contract allows for that with 14 days notice, and certainly the board would always retain that authority if there was something to go awry and RTD was not happy with this vendor or the work that was being done, or there were any concerns. There is, of course, that opportunity to terminate the agreement.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please, Director Cook.
So, given that this is sort of a substitute internal auditor, a chief audit executive, we're hiring it, we're outsourcing it. How does our functional supervision of that, how does that look compared to other contracts? How does our oversight of that contract look different from other contracts that you all manage?
Well, I think we can talk about if there are things that we want to add to the process for how we manage the contract. You know, certainly staff will oversee the invoices and the approval of invoices. If there are specific process changes we would want, or things that we want to add, I think that we would definitely be open to that. And I'm sure Chairman CEO Johnson can speak to that as well. But I do envision that this is going to be a different contract in the sense that this is a function that's going to be directly reporting to the board of directors. So I anticipate that the board is going to be very engaged with these services.
And thank you, General Counsel Snyder and Director Cook, for the follow-up. Before I call on Ms. Johnson here, I just want to comment that, again, I think this is where, you know, generally speaking, and somewhat what we had prior was the administrative reporting into staff and then the functional reporting into the board. One of the concepts that was suggested in the recommendation of the outsourcing model is identifying a liaison within the staff and organization to manage administrative tasks. I believe that that's something we can look at and should be looking at, but from a functional standpoint, I think it's important, again, we have to immediately establish the cadence of this board performing its duty of receiving all of the minimum reporting requirements at the very least from our internal audit function. I also just want to take one brief moment, just while I have the floor here, to comment on something General Counsel touched on. Well, I think I would agree we wouldn't typically want to start a contract talking about termination clauses, but it's particularly material here because it is essentially acting as a chief audit executive reporting into the board. We are outsourcing it, and it's very critical. It's laid out very clearly in the standards that performance evaluation and any corrections, anything that come out of that, need to fall to the board, in particular an audit committee if one should exist. So I think it's noteworthy that is in the terms and conditions. So General Counsel, thank you for highlighting that. Because Ms. Johnson was called upon by General Counsel, I do want to open the floor, particularly on the aspect of administrative reporting and a liaison. So Ms. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind commenting, please.
Thank you very much, Chair Davidson, and thank you, General Counsel Snyder, for your comments. I really don't have too much more to add because Director Davidson hit the nail on the head as he referenced the standards, because for all intents and purposes, this audit function is basically to minimize exposure to the enterprise of which the board has auspices over. And pursuant to the standards, it talks about having administrative liaison. As we look at this collectively in relationship to the function, whether it was internal or external, this, to the point that Chair Davidson raised, should be a function that clearly is coordinating with the board. So we as staff and I as the general manager or CEO would defer to you relative to who might be optimal in reference to serving as the administrative liaison as we look at ensuring that we are adhering to our procurement standards relative to looking at invoices and things of the like. So just wanted to put that forward, and I really don't have anything else to add because they did a great job in explaining the vantage point, especially as it relates to the international standards for auditing. Thank you.
That's all for now for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director Cook. And by the way, Director Cook, thank you for the question. I think I took the note that one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we are addressing the liaison topic, and that the audit, looking at Director Catlin here, that the audit ad hoc committee will probably want to add to our agenda discussion around the liaison, administrative liaison, and the structure. I would emphasize too for the entire board, those that aren't here as well as those who are, that we need to make sure that we're mitigating risk to the agency and the structure itself. So we need to make sure that when it comes to administrative, we're assigning somebody and putting the right people in the right place to not drop any balls on the contract and administration of that. Likewise, on the functional side, that we have a thoughtful structure for our committee to make sure that neither staff nor the board nor the agency are exposed to undue risk from the structure itself, which I don't believe I could say was the case in the certainly at least the prior decade. So thank you very much, Director Cook. Great note on the liaison piece here that I think we can add to an agenda. Director Geisinger, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of all the additional conversation, it might make sense for Director Catlin, Chair Catlin, to, she looks like she had perhaps some response if she wants to go first.
Thank you, guys. Not too many, actually. They were, for the most part, answered. I think Director Cook wanted there to be more than a coordinating role with the board, but rather a more of an oversight from the board for this audit function. My key concern in task 2 is the process to recruit committee members, but with emphasis on for the board's subsequent approval. And I think that's really key. The other thing that I wanted to note in their deliverables on task 3, I'm really interested in the record keeping and reporting. There are a lot of active actions, but one is develop recommendations on assessment of audit committee performance. And I think the key there is recommendations on assessment, because that is like this internal audit function recommending what the audit committee performance is doing. And I think we need to be really, really careful about that particular one. But in general, just because something is recommended does not mean that the board has to approve it or cannot make changes to some of these recommendations or suggestions. It has to be kind of a collaborative process in developing some of these deliverables. And I lost my train of thought. But going back to the very theme of this is that we just have to keep it within the standards and the guidelines. So thank you. That's all I had to add. The rest of it was clearly addressed by people speaking before me.
Thank you very much. And thank you for opening the floor up there, Director Geisinger. So Director Geisinger, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad I turned that over to Chair Catlin, because I think that those were really important points. I really appreciate all the work the ad hoc committee is doing. I know you guys have been working hard to stay on top of this and have a lot of experience with the audit and appreciate the work staff is doing as well. And I like a lot of what I'm hearing. You know, it was the 2010 legislative audit, the 2020 legislative audit, the peer review are all very focused on the fact that this is a board function and we're responsible. We have to be in charge. I shared the concern that no board member was on the procurement committee. And I appreciate that Director Catlin was observing and commenting, and I'm sure she added great value. But you know, why was that? It seems like this committee of all things that should be board driven.
Dr. Geisinger, thank you for the question. I'm wondering if I believe, first of all, I might open the floor to Dr. Catlin on the comment of the process. I know for one, I think the evaluation of the expertise is very useful to have our external members. The other person I think that we could open the floor to here to address and comment on this may be Mr. McLeod, if he's available, since he participated in the evaluation process from the RTD side and therefore had an opportunity to engage with our 3 external members and benefit from their expertise. So having not observed the process, I'm wondering if Director Catlin, as chair of the audit committee, you might want to comment on that, and then perhaps if Mr. McLeod is available, he may be able to comment as well on the process.
Well, you know, at this point in the process, it is what it is, and I'd like to move forward. I think Director Davidson put it well that he wasn't, and neither was I, focused so much on the who we selected, but on the what and how we move forward. And you know, it was kind of like that, begin with the end in mind. We need to get to a point where we can move forward. So I was happy to observe and comment during the evaluation discussion. But as we move forward, that's something that the audit committee and the board could discuss. In my mind, anyway.
And thank you. Thank you very much, Director Catlin. I think Director Geisinger, this is a really good point, and I think Director Catlin may have addressed that there's a broader discussion item about what in the universe of contracting, procurement, and so forth, the board would have any kind of role, if any, in procurement processes. Certainly from my viewpoint, this is something that was delegated to staff to identify the who for the why and what of the engagement. But Mr. McLeod, I'm wondering if you want to comment at all on some of the folks who did participate. I know we're not providing specific names at this time, but perhaps some of the background might be useful of those individuals.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to describe the process itself, once the proposals are received, and we did receive 5 proposals, everything is kept very independent in terms of the evaluation committee. So those submissions from the proposing vendors are sent to each member signs a non-disclosure agreement to start. They are provided those proposals. We each independently review those proposals and complete a scoring sheet, which is then provided to the contracts and procurement lead who's leading that effort, that RFP effort. Then we gather for this committee meeting and discuss what we saw in those proposals, what the strengths and weaknesses were for each one of those categories as they're weighted, qualifications of the firm, qualifications of the individuals. We do not evaluate the costs. The cost proposals are not provided to the members. Those are kept in procurement, and procurement brings those forth after all the scoring is done and consolidated into one final score by proposer. Cost is brought into that calculation, and it's strictly based on a very objective calculation of what the cost came through as in terms of best value, essentially. So that's the process that we go through. Regarding the individuals on the team, we by design only had 2 individuals out of the 5 individuals participating in this from RTD. Those other individuals were independent, have the expertise, they have decades of experience. They're leaders in their organizations. They're C-suite level folks that are really experts in their fields. They have certifications such as certified internal auditor, certified information systems auditor, certified financial examiner. There's also a CPA, certified public accountant. Several of these designations they have behind their name. So, I was very comfortable with their skill level. And frankly, of the two RTD employees, one was there primarily to evaluate the 10% SBE requirement. Didn't weigh in on the actual proposals. So the weighting was definitely weighted towards their evaluations from an independent perspective from the scoring. So I felt that it was a very objective, fair, and professional evaluation.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm not asking the question honestly to look backwards, but to encourage you to stay as our board representatives. I think you're doing a great job, but to stay diligent in working closely with Reuben Brown. I think not only do we need them to be reporting back annually, but that the external committee, we need to be significant in that process. And so I encourage that. I talked with Ms. Snyder today. Our bylaws say that when we are, our designated agent hires a professional agent of the district, that contracts for such services may be entered into on such terms and conditions as to the board may seem reasonable and proper. I get that this is urgent and important, and I will move this forward. But given that, I would request that we not put this on the unanimous consent agenda at the board meeting, and that we do get the terms and conditions for board review in that packet. I'm not anticipating, I know terms and conditions are pretty straightforward. I'm not anticipating that those will be an issue. I appreciate your coordination on the scope of work, but just to comply with our bylaws, that seems like a step we might want to take. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Director Geisinger, for the comments. And if I may just react briefly, I appreciate the encouragement for the board, and particularly the audit ad hoc committee, to maintain a role and to push forward and be very proactive here. I think the exciting thing is, I would just note, we have an opportunity to really lead in this area. One of the challenges that we face is, of the few of us that are elected boards and transit agencies across the country, there's not really a great structure for us to look at when it comes to our audit function. So, we have an opportunity to get this right and really lead and demonstrate a good model. So being proactive, I appreciate that encouragement. In terms of removing from the unanimous consent to look at the terms and conditions, as I understand it, it would be fairly uncommon for the T's and C's to change from the solicitation, but given the importance in the functional reporting, I certainly understand the request, and I will look to, I think we can go for the motion at hand here this evening, but then I'll look to Chair Busick as well as others on staff and the team to work out how we will go ahead and structure that agenda at the meeting of the 28th, should this recommended action pass this evening. So just some reactions, and thank you, Director Geisinger. Just because I addressed and reacted, anything you'd want to comment on based on that?
Just to be clear, thank you that I don't enter. I know the T&Cs are standard, but given the language of our bylaws, it seems like it makes sense to provide it to the board. I don't anticipate opposing that or anything like that. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. I appreciate it. By the way, I appreciate all the comments this evening and engagement. It's good. I think this is a good sign for where we're headed with audit, that we've got some engagement here. So Chair Busick, I see that you have your hand raised as well, and thank you for joining us at the committee, and please go ahead, sir.
Great, thanks, Chair. And is it the Audit Ad Hoc Committee or the Ad Hoc Audit Committee? I can never keep that straight. But I want to thank that committee for your hard work and diligence in getting this done. It's really a great product. So one of the things that I liked in terms of the process, the procurement process, and I understand the concerns with regard to the selection committee, but one thing that did happen that I was pleased with is that when the scope of work was being finalized, the committee was able to review it and to comment on it. And I've been harping on this for a while, and I brought it up at our board retreat that, we typically have a 4-step process. You get a scope of work when we are bringing in outside consultants. You get a scope of work, you do your solicitation, then a recommended selection is proposed, and then it comes to the board for the final decision. And typically, we're only brought into the process down here at the final step. But I always think it's important for us to be involved at that first step, that scope of work step, because the way a scope of work is written can really determine the type of work and the type of respondents you'll get to those solicitations. So I'm really glad to see that happened with this, and such an important selection. So thanks for that, and we'll take up Director Geisinger's request for the removing from the consent agenda. So we'll talk about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Chair Busick. Appreciate the comments and sentiment. I see that Director Rivera-Malpiedi, as I said with Chair Busick, thank you for joining us this evening in the committee. Please go ahead with any comments or questions.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take us back to 2020, when the first meeting I went to was with the State Audit Committee that just annihilated this agency because of the lack of any kind of process was in place. And I sat next to our new general manager, Deborah Johnson, and we had already implemented the first ad hoc committee to look at the audit process. And so I'd like to go back historically with this board to say, we have come a long way together to work towards the good of the entire agency. And in fact, we were willing to go back and reinstate the Financial Sustainability Committee from 2012 to show that we really had this strong commitment to opening up all our books and looking at all the processes that was in place. And so as the former chair for the last 2 years before the great Chair Busick, I just want to say, from where I sit, I think that the amount of work that has taken place has been just extraordinary in terms of how we've gone from point A to point B, and really the credibility and respect that we have garnered back from the legislature and the governor based on the work that we've done as a whole as the board. And I think we need to move forward, but I would just say that I wholeheartedly support and the work of the staff and the work that they've done in terms of making sure that all of the procurements that are going out are being done in accordance to our due diligence. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much, Director Rivera-Malpiedi, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you for that involvement while you were chair in really starting the work that we're moving in on, and likewise echo the sentiment that, huge thank you to staff for the participation in this. We've been through some change since then, and we have a lot more ahead. I think the exciting thing is, like I said, we have a chance to lead. So thank you for your involvement, and thank you for your comments this evening. Director Cook, please.
I really appreciate the second bite at the apple. Thank you. So I just wanted to add support for the idea of bringing forward the terms and conditions of the contract. The board should, the committee, the ad hoc committee at least, but the finance committee, if it's coming through that committee, should have eyes on that if in fact it's going to be our contract. Second thing is, can we exclude this from the GM's delegation of authority to amend? So that any amendment or changes come back through the committee and not are signed off on under her authority to modify.
Director Cook, are you proposing an amendment on this?
I think I will, yeah. So that would be to exclude from the normal delegation of authority that the GM enjoys for this particular contract, so that if any changes are needed to be made, they come back to the finance, or actually through the ad hoc committee and then to the finance committee before approval.
So the amendment is with the intent, as I understand it, is, as you just concluded with, for any changes to come through committee and then to full board should there be changes or amendments. Did I understand the intent correctly, Director Cook?
Yes, thank you.
Great. And General Counsel Snyder, I'm wondering if you could assist in, if we are going to entertain an amendment this evening, if you might assist with the crafting of the language. But would you be able to assist with that? Should we have a motion and should we move forward? But before I go ahead and call for a motion.
Yes, absolutely. The only proposed adjustment that I would make to that is that you not necessarily designate that it's the ad hoc committee, understanding that that committee might eventually be disbanded and you'll have an operative audit committee. So I think just as you restated it, Director Davidson, that it would be excluded from the 2022 general manager's delegation of authority so that any amendments would come back through committee and then to the board.
That would be my motion.
Thank you very much. So that's the motion from Director Cook. Do I hear a second on that amendment?
I'll second it.
That's Director Geisinger as the second, Director Cook as the mover. We'll go ahead and call for a vote on that. Let me just make a few notes to myself here. Apologies. I want to be sure I'm organized with this.
I think we need discussion first, Chair.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's open for, thank you very much, Director Geisinger. Much appreciated. Let's go ahead and open the floor for discussion on that item. Dr. Catlin, I see that your hand is raised. Do you have a comment on the amendment, or do you want to hold to return back to the main motion?
Actually, both, but I was trying to, the recommended action is pretty brief, so it's not explicit about the amendments to any contract. And so I was just wondering how that would be worded. And I guess General Counsel Snyder was going to help with that verbiage.
Yeah, General Counsel Snyder, would you feel comfortable as we go into discussion here reading off what the language would read as amended?
Yes, we can add. So the recommended action before you is for the board of directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to enter into a contract with Reuben Brown LLC for internal audit services for 3 base years and 2 option years with a total not to exceed contract value of $3,212,106, and to exclude from the 2022 delegation from the board to the general manager any amendments to such contract.
Thank you very much, General Counsel. I appreciate that. So, Dr. Catlin, does that answer the question as to what the language would read from the amended motion?
I think so. Would we want to add, but such amendments should come to the board for approval?
I think, would I be wrong in assuming that that would, by default, given our bylaws, have to be the case?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm good with it then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Snyder. Thank you, Director Catlin. Director Geisinger, please.
I just was curious if how this fits with our delegation. Would an amendment to a contract that we approve ordinarily not come back to us, Ms. Snyder?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
So under the 2022 delegation, the general manager has authority up to $2 million. And then there is also a provision of that delegation that provides that she has authority up to 25% for amendments and change orders, 25% of the original contract. So technically, just for reference, this base contract really didn't need to come to the board, but the GM and CEO elected to bring it to the board and package the option years as well, so that the board could weigh in on it. But technically, the option years would have had to come back to the board because those would have exceeded the additional authority that the GM has. So is your question whether we need to go and also amend the resolution of the delegation? Is that what you're talking about, Director Dyson?
No, I just was curious. I didn't understand if we approve a contract initially, that whether it would just be amended, whether it could be amended without our approval. And it sounds like your answer is yes. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Up to that 25% that I referenced, the original contract.
Well, thanks. I mean, I guess I haven't thought about this, but this is such a board issue that that I would support the amendment.
Okay, thank you, Director Geisinger. Director Rivera Malpiedi, please.
Yes, I would have to respectfully not agree with First Vice Chair Geisinger. I think that we as a board really need to sit down and look at the whole procurement process that is written bylaws and have to adhere to them. And what our general manager has done is exactly what has been written in the bylaws. And I think that, you know, if we need to change the bylaws, that's one thing, but I don't think we can do it midstream. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate the comments. Director Catlin, I see your hand is raised. Do you have further comments? Is that just still for the main motion, or any further comments on the amended motion?
I'm sorry, it was for the main motion.
Okay, great. General Counsel, given the comments from Director Rivera Malpiedi, I do have a question just regarding whether you see any risks to the amendment as it relates to our bylaws or standard procurement practices.
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't see any risks. You know, the board holds plenary authority over all contracting and, of course, has delegated that in a broad scope to the general manager and CEO. So it always has, the board always has the ability to amend that delegation and adjust it.
Okay, thank you very much for the comment. I think I do understand the intent of the amendment given the functional reporting of the contracted firm to the board. Again, I think this is probably an area, there's maybe a broader topic here that gets to the forming of the audit committee, which is what is administrative and where does administrative go as far as the purview of, say, a liaison versus what is functional. Certainly significant changes to scope of work and the what would certainly be very functional. I would think that small adjustments in budget may be kind of blurring the line between functional and administrative, and that's probably a topic that we also want to add to our ad hoc committee in terms of discussion of that. I think the intent of the 25% is actually to help kind of with that line. But I do understand the intent. I think what we'll go ahead and do is call for a vote on the amendment, on the amended language to exclude this from the designation of authority of the general manager. So I'm going to go ahead and go through name by name here. So we're voting on the amendment with the mover as Director Cook and with the second as Director Geisinger. I'll go ahead and call first on Director Broom, please.
Yes.
Committee Vice Chair Catlin.
Yes.
Director Cook.
Yes.
Director Deschelle is absent. Director Geisinger.
Yes.
Director Whitmore.
No.
I will vote yes. So we have 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent. The motion passes with the no being Director Whitmore and the absent being Director Deschelle. Now we'll return to the main motion as amended. Director Catlin, I believe you had your hand up for further discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out, as that General Counsel Snyder already did, that theoretically this contract would not have had to come before this committee because of the option years would have had to, because it was under the $2 million limit. Is that correct? And I wanted to say thank you for the foresight to bring it to this committee, since it did warrant discussion, and that we do need to, as Chair Davidson said, own this process. And so I just wanted to thank both GM CEO Johnson and General Counsel Snyder for recommending that this be moved to the committee for consideration and then taken to the full board. Because by the resolution that we passed, it did not technically have to. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Director Catlin. I would certainly echo those sentiments and thank Ms. Johnson and staff for bringing this forward to the board. I think this has been an important discussion. I know that there's lots to discuss. I think this is why I really truly mean that the audit ad hoc committee or ad hoc audit committee, my apologies for mixing those two, Chair Busick, good call out. Why we do need to have some engagement here and really set our eyes on establishing a framework that will certainly be unique among our peers that have elected boards. So certainly this board has my commitment to push forward and find a good path forward. I know that that is shared with other directors on that committee. And I sincerely thank Ms. Johnson for bringing your expertise from other agencies and lending both your concern, your alarm, and also your constant energy and work on this and attention to something that really needed a lot of help and attention. So certainly appreciate that. I do see that Director Whitmore has raised his hand, so go ahead, sir.
Well, I know we have a long night ahead of us, so I'll be brief. I thoroughly appreciate the spirit of all these conversations and the importance of them, and this has been very helpful to me. I just wanted to say I just get a little nervous on amendments that are kind of last minute, and I agree somewhat with Director Rivera-Malpietti, so that explains my my hesitancy and my no vote on the amendment. No disrespect to Director Cook or anybody else. I think it's well intentioned and probably going to be just fine. But that was why I took the negative side, which is usually not my case. But appreciate again the spirit of this very educational session and sorely needed over the last several years. So onward and upward, and thank you to the leadership of Chairperson Davidson.
Thank you very much, Director Whitmore. Very much appreciate the explanation on that. And I think several of us were probably trying to think through what the path forward was there, and certainly appreciate the additional comments. I think, as I mentioned, it'll be very worthy of discussion as we get to the discussion of administrative versus functional. There's a longer term. This would be likened to, given that this is outsourced, adjustments to an employment contract of the chief audit executive, adjustments to compensation and so forth. Those types of things, would be the sort of discussion we'd be having in terms of what's administrative, what's functional. And I would encourage, no matter where we came down on the amendment, that we use the discussion tonight to motivate further discussion on the matter of administrative versus functional as we proceed with the work itself. So thank you for those comments, and thank you for allowing me to react to them. Director Geisinger, please.
Thank you. Just to add that, my comments are just paying attention to the world and all the advice we've been given by the legislature and the peer review and Ms. Johnson, what she's brought in. I agree that I appreciate this contract coming forward. I think it's very important that it does and did, and I think that the amendment was given in that spirit as well, that our board has really got to be careful about when you need to move forward expeditiously and urgently, and also careful that we do it right. And I appreciate so much the committee's work and the staff's work in doing that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Director Geisinger. Point well taken, that expeditiously but also diligently. So thank you. Director Broom, please.
Yeah, I have a question. In the private sector, when people serve on an audit committee, they're generally compensated for it. In our case, if we're going to have outside people sit on an audit committee, are we going to compensate those people, or has that been decided yet?
Director Brumia, if I may, that hasn't been decided yet. As we look forward towards the long-term audit committee, it's a great question. Actually, just had a conversation with some folks about this today. Yes, right, that would be typical in the private sector. I think there are some agencies we can look to and some constructs we can look to with respect to whether we end up having external members that join a committee. Folks in the IIA chapters will sometimes serve on committees. I don't think we could comment as to whether that's been selected. I think that will be up for discussion and would certainly be something we would be seeking guidance from on the firm, particularly Reuben Brown, should the motion pass this evening. So thank you for that question. It's, I think, a really critical and very important one. The structure of that audit committee, as well as compensation structure for any external, will be very, very important, particularly as it pertains to I know in the private sector, one thing that you have to be very careful of is if there is compensation, understanding whether that it has any undue influence. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of looking at that, and we'll certainly add that to the list of questions for our retained services. So thank you, Director Broom. Does that satisfy your comments and questions for now?
Thank you, it does.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I'll make sure to add that to our questions list. A good one. Director Rivera Malpiedi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me a bite at the apple for a second time. I would like to add on to that and ask that any of the members of the audit committee be experts in the field of finance so that we are making sure that we have the brightest minds at the table working with us in terms of trying to develop a strategy and a plan of action.
Thank you very much, Director Rivera Malpiedi. And I would note as I mentioned, there are standards with which we must comply, and there are also guidelines, both specified by the IIA as well as other groups, as to how we might implement. And there actually are some really nice guidelines out there, not standards, but guidelines as to the type of expertise that we might retain for an external audit committee. I'd love for us all to take a good look at that, especially where we are now. There's some benefit, many would argue, to even having some IT and cybersecurity expertise in addition to board. I think I am disconnected.
So
We could hear you.
Did I drop out?
No,
Okay.
you're here.
All right. Everything froze and my audio cut for a second, so thank you. Apologies. Sounds like there's some connection issues this evening. My apologies. So anyway, we'll definitely take a look at that. There's a lot of good, I think, frameworks we could take a look at, and thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Chair.
Further questions, discussion? All right. So if I'm not mistaken, we are back to the main motion as amended. So I'm going to go ahead and, just as I did for the amendment, given the amount of discussion we had this evening, go through and call on directors one by one for a vote. So first up, Director Broom, please.
Yes.
Committee Vice Chair Catlin.
Yes.
Director Cook.
Yes.
Director Deschelle is absent. Director Geisinger.
yes.
Director Whitmore.
Yes.
And Director Davidson is a yes. I should have noted that the mover on that was Committee Vice Chair Catlin, and the second was Director Whitmore. The motion is passed with 6 yeas and 1 absent. I would just like to say, and perhaps Director Catlin, actually I see your hand is raised, so I'm going to open the floor to you first. Director Catlin, please.
I neglected to say earlier that I completely agree with taking this off the consent agenda because I do think that the whole board should be involved in the discussion because it is, as you said, we need to own this. So that I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Given that we're moving out of committee to the board, I just wanted to add, I'm very pleased. That's going to be no secret with how much I've spoken up this evening. So thank you for the support. Thank you for the discussion. Very much look forward to bringing this to the full board to look at engaging with Reuben Brown. We got a lot of work to do, and we've been in a little bit of a holding pattern. So I really appreciate the move forward here. And thank you very much to staff for moving forward through the procurement process here. I know there's a lot to check off, and I appreciate it. So let's move on. Thanks for all the time y'all gave me here. The fourth recommended action this evening is for the Zero Fare Ozone Grant Program Intergovernmental Agreement, or IGA. This is for the Board of Directors to authorize the General Manager and CEO or her designee to enter into an IGA with the Colorado Energy Office, and to authorize the transfer of up to $2,200,000 from the unrestricted fund in accordance with SB 22-180 to effectuate the Zero Fare Ozone Grant Program. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Director Geisinger moving, second Director Broom. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and hand this off. I believe this evening we are joined by Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer, and Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning, to present this item. So I will happily hand the ball to either of you that would like to pick this one up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager Planning. I'll lead and let Michael Davies fill in the blanks. So just briefly, I think the recommended action itself is very noted. The Colorado Energy Office is responsible for administering the program on behalf of the state and awarding the grants. Mr. Davies, RTD's Government Relations Officer, has been leading the multidisciplinary discussions between RTD and that office. So given that, I'd like to invite him to provide a brief update regarding those discussions and any additional information he might have regarding this recommended action. Both Michael and I will remain available to answer any questions the board might have. Michael?
Thank you, Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. My comments are very brief. It's just to outline and make sure the board is aware of our interaction with the Energy Office on this grant program. We have been meeting with them sometimes weekly, sometimes on a bi-weekly basis, but very often. And that is primarily to give them a good understanding of how RTD develops its costs and estimates for items that we are anticipating to include in the grant process. And all of that is to try to anticipate and answer any questions they have and make sure that the process for approving the grant and making sure it all goes smoothly happens in a timely manner, as we don't have a lot of time to implement this program since the signing of the bill. So those discussions have been very fruitful, and really appreciate the effort from the Energy Office. As some of the directors know, this is the first time that the Energy Office is really engaged in this type of a grant program. So they are developing it from the ground up. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Mr. Van Meter, anything else to present on this matter before opening up the floor? See some shaking heads. So I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for any questions or discussion. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and ask just the one question I have. I think this is for you, Ms. Johnson. One question that I've heard from some folks preparing to assist in this matter is just the this is an opportunity to bring some customers in. I guess that's what we're really hoping to do here. But we want to make sure to deliver that high level of experience. So just wondering, in terms of, obviously we're very constrained on workforce right now, and that sometimes causes our disruptions to service. I just wondered if you wouldn't mind commenting just on your general impression about the current plan and current thoughts on ensuring a positive customer experience during the month of August. I know this is going to be a challenge, to say the least, for staff, and would love to hear just a brief update from you on that.
Thank you very much, Director Davidson. Thanks to Mr. Van Meter and Mr. Davies for presenting the item. As relates to the customer experience, recognizing that you stated the obvious, that we do have people power problems. And even though we're rallying around this initiative as it relates to Zero Fare for Better Air, I'd be remiss to stand before you or sit before you here virtually and state that we don't have trepidation and angst about being able to deliver service as we would like to, recognizing various elements that have impacted our service delivery since the onset of COVID and the residual impacts as of late as relates to global issues in reference to the war on Ukraine, supply chain issues, and a myriad of different factors going forward. One thing's for certain as we go, we're going to try our best to deliver service, but there are no guarantees. And just as we can't make guarantees as we sit here today and say that as well, we are working in conjunction with our union partners. Just attended a meeting yesterday with the executive board of the Amalgamated Transit Union, and we had a fruitful discussion about some concerns that they have wholeheartedly. We've heard that here with the board as well as we go forward. But you have my commitment that we're going to do the best that we possibly can, but recognizing, equipment failures and other things of the like will come into play, especially when you have a propensity to have a greater volume of people, and recognizing the societal issues that plague us as well. We have to be cognizant of the fact with taking buses out of service for biohazards and things of the like. So we do have a plan. We've been talking about it, but a plan is just a plan. But needless to say that we are committed to doing the best that we can possibly as we go forward. Another aspect of this is that we are going to be working in earnest with a myriad of different entities. We'll hear more information on that during the course of the board meeting on June 28th. We will be prepared to share with you some insights relative to our communication strategy and graphics and other collateral pieces, because we want to share those with you before we leverage that going forward with our partners around the region. So that's what I have in a nutshell, and we'll provide more information on the 28th as we start to assemble meetings going forward. But if anything, people power is still a problem.
Thank you very much for commenting on that. And I guess in there, implicit in my question is, have we allocated the appropriate funds to move forward here? But there's no amount of money we can really throw at the people power problem at the moment. So that's one of the ones to watch, and appreciate that staff is standing by and meeting and ready to handle this. There's a great opportunity here to, celebrate transit, work with the community, and also learn a little bit, see what we learn out of this effort. So thanks for being supportive and preparing for that. With no other hands being raised or comments, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. Actually, I do see Director Rivera Melpieti. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I didn't think I'd be talking so much this evening, but I do want to say one thing about this. That caused me angst, and that was a CBS 7 report where one of the legislators said that RTD was assuring them that we could do this work, and it really does cause me angst, because I think that as a board of directors, we need to be very realistic about exactly what we can do and what we can't do. And I think our communications piece is going to be extraordinarily important. August is one of the hottest months of the year in our community. And we all know what happened during the pandemic. And I think that we as board members need to really take a look at our different districts and making sure we're working with our elected officials and municipalities, that we are working in collaboration with the agency, Ms. Johnson and her staff, to make sure that we're disseminating the correct information and that we're able to move forward. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Director, for the comments. Very much appreciate the sentiment and the need to work with all local partners in preparation for this. Thank you. Any other comments? Or we'll go ahead and call for the vote. All right, seeing no other discussion, I'm going to go ahead and call for that vote. I'm going to do this with any no votes, given limited discussion here. So are there any no votes on this action? Being none, the motion will pass with 6 yeses and 1 absent. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll move to the fifth recommended action this evening. This is the Sub-Regional Service Council formation. This is for the Board of Directors to adopt the recommendation of Sub-Regional Service Council Working Group as detailed herein in our packet, and to direct staff to form sub-regional service councils consistent with the 2021 agency responses to the RTD Accountability Committee final report. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Whitmore is the mover. Do I have a second?
Well, we can't let it die. I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Cook. All right. With that, I'm going to hand the ball to Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning, and Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities, to please begin the presentation of the recommended action.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Bill Van Meter, AGM Planning again. And I am pleased to have the opportunity in just a few moments to turn it over to Bill Soroy to provide more detail. As you noted, Bill Soroy is the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities. And Bill and his team worked with the working group, formed it, convened it, and had a very successful number of discussions in response to and in support of and consistent with the direction provided by RTD's board in our response, your response, the agency's response, I should say, to the Accountability Committee's final report. So they were very productive meetings. Bill will take you through the recommendations and proposed action in more detail. And at this point, I'll turn it over to him, and hopefully he can pull the presentation up and give you a brief recounting of the work they performed.
Thank you, Bill. Again, this is Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities. So bear with me for 2 seconds while I go ahead and share my screen here. And okay, can you see the full screen? Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
So as Bill said, the early part of this year, we formed the working group kind of as going to follow up to the commitment that the board and our GM CEO Johnson made to the Accountability Committee. So we, as if you remember from the Accountability Committee recommendation, there was a lot of discussion about service and about local input to service. So as part of the working group, we established kind of 3 pieces to it, looking at the purpose or role of the group, membership, and then kind of look at the boundary concepts, which was something that the Accountability Committee did wrestle with when they were discussing this issue. So the participants in the group, again, we looked to kind of at the county level through the transportation forums that Dr. Kaga, we got representatives from all of those groups. We also got representatives from other NGOs that represent, our customers, and including also our own internal, our own committees, the CAC and the ACPD committee. So to really make sure that we get a broad kind of perspective in this discussion. And then I would be remiss without kind of recognizing the support that I received from other folks at the agency, including Jesse Carter, our head of service development, Christina Zazueta from communications, as well as some of my own staff, and Chessie Brady and Charlie Stanfield. So with the work group, like I said, we looked at the conversation, looked at the 3 kind of items we were discussed. There was, like I said, a very robust discussion with the group. We had 3 meetings. A big thing that came out through this conversation was the use of the term dialogue. I think that there is kind of a sense, particularly at the local level, of wanting to make sure that there is this dialogue back and forth about service, and their concerns or interest in service, some of the things that they're seeing or hearing from their community, some of the development they're seeing, as well as then dialogue from our perspective in terms of trends that we're seeing, opportunities, people power issues and people power trends, and understanding how that's going to affect service. So that was a really good conversation. Also the other thing is in making sure these are advisory. I think that was very clear. Meeting 3 or 4 times a year, again, quarterly. The one thing that I think that came out that I think was really positive, and I know Jesse really appreciated this, is that these meetings wouldn't be tied to the service change schedule. I think a lot of what happens today if any of you ever participate in the listening sessions that we do have, a lot of times I think there's the expectation that we have these listening sessions kind of slotted in a kind of a very narrow window of where we can have a conversation about potential changes to the service proposals, service changes. And that really, Jesse did a great job at the beginning of this in presenting the 542 steps of the service change process, which again, it's pretty daunting to understand that and trying to fit that. So I think the notion here is that the conversation can happen about service, but it may affect service changes that are 2, 3, or 4 run boards down the road. And I think everybody understood that after the conversation, understood that related to the process. So that was really important. Then we did have the conversation about composition of the groups. I think this was the folks on the group, and this came from the group, that were saying that it should be staff. I think there was some discussion about what forum do elected officials and where do they have their forum. We, as an alternative to that, proposed that we would hold separate elected officials briefings twice a year, that we could have discussions about service and about other issues related to the agency. I think those would relate more closely relate to the local government committee meetings that we have today. The other thing, again, like I said, we did talk about the boundary concepts that were discussed at the accountability committee, but there was no uniform consensus from the group. So I'll just kind of bring up these maps because these represent the 3 different boundary options that we discussed. The first 2, the county-based and then the travel shed-based, were discussed at the accountability committee. The third one was actually brought up by the group. I think there was a notion that, having 5 different meetings, and this was for people that would be involved in multiple meetings because they're part of multiple groups, were concerned about that. So we did have that discussion, but I think there was a strong consensus that there was some people on the one end, on the county-based end, and there were some people on the service planning side, but I think everybody was comfortable with the middle. So we ended up recommending, we do recommend moving forward with that concept. It's fairly consistent with how we're doing things today. We think it does make sense from a service standpoint because it does recognize kind of how people travel using transit. And so I think there is some uniformity to kind of how we look at service in that context. The kind of the notion, and this is another piece that this just to kind of give everybody a sense of the groups and how the makeup of the groups. So this is kind of just gives you an estimate based upon the jurisdictions that are in each individual kind of designated boundary, whether it be county, travel shed, or the service planning sector. You can see kind of how exponentially they get larger as they get smaller. But I think that, we feel that the groups, particularly within the travel shed, are very manageable in terms of, the size of those groups and the conversation that can happen with those groups. So with that, what this recommendation is requesting is that the board consider approving this so that authorizing staff to go forward and start the recruitment process for these sub-regional service councils. That would happen the next couple months. Then we would look to formally initiate these councils sometime in the fall. So with that brief presentation, I will open it up and stop sharing my screen for a second, and then open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Siroy. Let's go ahead and open the floor for any questions or discussion from directors. Any questions? Oh, there we go. Okay. Director Cook.
First of all, thank you all very much for carrying this forward. I think it was one of the key recommendations of the Accountability Committee. It was something that the municipalities in District L and otherwise had strongly supported, and I'm just really glad that we're moving forward with this, and think it could be a really key aid in working with the region. The one thing, the purpose of the committee you had listed on that one screen, I don't have it in front of me right now, but it was to provide recommendations. Let me see if I can get back to that. Said provide recommendations / feedback from a sub-regional perspective. And I pulled up the Accountability Committee's report, and it wanted us to establish service councils so that they would have responsibility for developing and recommending, quote, local transit service plans for the board's consideration. I don't know if you all would have had discussion about that, but I read that as having intended that the local, the communities would have some say in the plans that would, or that the service that would end up coming to their areas. And I recognize there's kind of a tension between good service planning principles and what the area communities might want. But can you speak to that? Will provide recommendations, or will they be able to say, this is my first question, I've got one other one too. Will they be able to say, look, we'd like to see X in our community, and have the agency be able to take that up?
Again, Chair, this is Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities. Yes, we did talk about that. I think that, that the dialogue piece, I think, does reflect that in terms of things that the locals want to see based upon, their conversations with community members, their understanding of where development is. I think that's balanced with, like you said, good service planning principles, and looking at this in terms of us kind of coming back with, well, here's the resources we have, because I think, the one thing that's very clear from my conversation with Jesse, this is all very resource driven. So depending on, our resources and with our people power issue today, we have a lot of challenges. So understanding that, kind of having that back and forth dialogue, because I do think, perfect example is it may be a conversation that happens, but it may be 3 or 4 run boards down the road where that, actual comes to fruition because of, the people power issue or other issues that we have to deal with.
Okay. And I think that give and take is really important, because I think we can do a better job of planning if we understand the developments and initiatives, et cetera, that communities and their stakeholders, et cetera, have underway. So I really applaud that. The second question is on the counties. It's going to be a really big group, not counties, on the service travel sheds. And some communities straddle the lines. So will they will have representatives on 2 committees? Is that how you would see it? And other communities would only have representation on 1? Is that basically what you're saying here?
Yes, yes, that's how we kind of see it moving forward.
Since it's so big, is there a chance that you could, as part of your planning process that now folds in this group's thoughts, would you be able to have sub meetings or something like that, since we're going at it with a big group? So is there a chance that to facilitate that kind of back and forth and give and take, that you would be able to have meetings with some smaller subset who have common, have common interests or something like that? Would that work?
I do think that naturally occurs. I mean, I do think that, and I'm not speaking for service development, but I know they frequently meet with people on a jurisdiction basis. And some more than others, because there's some who have higher interests and want to have more communication than others. So I do think that will happen naturally. I would hate to say that the full group, it may be more service development oriented that, they meet with some of those kind of individual groups to have some of those follow-up discussions.
Okay. Will they have a chance, oh, I'm going for a third, but will they have a chance to self-structure in a little bit, some of how they operate? Will, they have the chance with you to restructure a little bit as they get into it, to kind of adjust this model since we're kind of making it up as we go?
Yeah, I think naturally, I think part of the first conversation would, I would look at something like guidelines or rules that we would establish, and we could look at going into that. I think we would want to have some consistency across the 5 sub-regional service councils. So there could be maybe a little bit of give and take with some individual ones, but I think we would want to have an overall consistency so that we don't have one group that does one thing completely different than another group. So I do think we want to have some level of consistency with that, but I think there is certainly some conversation that we can have about some modifications in terms of how they operate so that there's some uniqueness to each group.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks to both Bills and everybody involved here, Jesse and all.
Thank you very much, Director Cook and both Bills for the answers there. I think I saw Director Catlin, your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we talked about this in our pre-committee planning meeting, and I brought up the fact that travel sheds as they exist today are likely to change in the next 20 years. And my hope is that there would be some provision for adjusting as time goes on and as travel sheds will change. So they're very different than what they were 20 years ago when Fast Tracks was envisioned. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I did have one question. It came up a little bit in discussion in the preparation meeting. Mr. Stroy, I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit. I know, Mr. Van Meter, we talked a little bit in the prep meeting just about some of the dialogue around, given that there wasn't clear consensus between those different models, I know it's noted that, most seem like they could sort of settle with the travel shed model. Sometimes, often compromise is great. Sometimes it's can be precarious. I'm wondering if you could just comment a little bit more about some of the dialogue, what some of the pushback was on travel shed. I certainly see accepting it as I understand the logic of travel shed for all the reasons we've been talking about, but could you maybe highlight some of the pushback on the travel shed model?
Sure. Like I said, I think there was, 2 kind of groups within the working group. One was oriented towards more the county-based model, and I think it was a model because they're used to that organization in terms of how they have discussions. The Dr. Cog transportation forums are naturally occur in that forum. And they have kind of are familiar with that approach and that kind of focus. And then kind of within kind of the other realm were people that I think that saw themselves as probably being part of multiple groups and were kind of a little concerned about their availability and their ability to cover multiple meetings. So, they were kind of on the other front. And so but everybody was going to say, if we have to do the travel shed, I can probably live with it. And I think the other unique thing about the travel shed, because I think probably the most kind of loudest comment that we heard was particularly from Boulder County, who wanted to be within their own own group because of how they see transit working and how they do it within their own county. And again, we recognize that in the travel shed group, because I think we do recognize that they do have a fairly self-contained transit network within kind of our larger network.
Okay, thank you for commenting on that. Appreciate it. That concludes my questions. Appreciate the additional context. Any further questions, dialogue? All right, we had just enough discussion on that I think I'll go ahead and do a line-by-line vote here. So name by name, rather. We have the mover as Director Whitmore, the second as Director Cook on this action. Director Broom, please.
No.
Committee Vice Chair Catlin.
Yes.
Director Cook,
Yes.
Director Deschelle is absent. Director Geisinger,
Yes.
Director Whitmore,
Yes.
and I am a yes. We have 5 yeses, 1 absent, 1 no. The motion passes. The no, an A being Director Broom, absent being Director Deschelle. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. Very much appreciate the work on that. Echo the sentiments of the prior directors that be part of what was brought forward by the Accountability Committee. So certainly appreciate all the time that's gone into addressing that. We'll go ahead and move to the last and final recommended action this evening. This is regarding the City of Aurora annexations. This is for the Board of Directors to approve the revised boundary map of the district and authorize the Secretary to certify the boundary map and description to reflect new areas, reflect the areas newly annexed to RTD pursuant to the provisions of CRS Section 32-9-106.1 and 106.6 parens B, designated as follows. A, City of Aurora Ordinance 2021-42, 2021-44, and 2021-46. Director, District B, Director Lewis. B, City of Aurora Ordinances 2020-25, 2021-25, 2021-26, 2020-066. Director, District F, Director Broom. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
We have mover as Director Broom, second as Director Geisinger. I will now hand the floor to Mr. Chris Quinn, Planning Project Manager. Would you please present the item to the committee? You're on mute, sir.
Chair, this is Bill Van Meter. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I
don't
know what yeah, we've been 2 years into this and still having trouble. These, I just want to emphasize to the board, these were municipal annexations that have occurred by the City of Aurora. So by state statute, when a jurisdiction annexes areas that are outside the current district boundaries, those do automatically come in. What we do request from the board is to make sure that we are assigning these new areas to the most appropriate directors. So that is essentially the action that we are seeking from the board tonight.
Thank you very much appreciated. Any discussion or questions on the matter? Being none, we'll go ahead and move to the vote. I'm going to go ahead and call. Are there any no votes? Great. The ayes have it. We have 6 yeses, 1 absent, with the absent being Director Deschelle. The motion passes. Thank you very much. And that concludes our recommended actions this evening. We are going to go ahead and proceed into our discussion items. First of all, I know many of you have hung out to be here for the discussion item. I would just give a sincere thank you to all of staff for being here. I know we've had a lengthier meeting. Very, very much appreciate being here. So let's move into the discussion items. We have one. It is the system-wide fair study and equity analysis. I would like to ask Chris Quinn again, Planning Project Manager, and Carl Green Jr., Acting Director, Civil Rights, which I believe may have changed, to present this discussion item. So I'd like to, first of all, ask if there are any comments or questions from the, any questions? Sorry, this has been a long evening. It's just, thank you for everyone for being here and sticking with me. Let's open this up for any presentation on the matter, please.
Okay, can you go to the next slide, Carl? So tonight, just a few things that we do want to bring the board up to date related to the fair study and equity analysis. Just review the goals, talk about the April, May engagements that we've had, both external, internal, and then talk about the next steps as we move forward. Next slide, please. The next. Just to remind the board why we are conducting the fair study again. Of course, it's to make the services and our fares more equitable and understandable, and to align fares with align the fares with the services and the values provided. One of the things we also do want to remind the board is, per House Bill 1186 that was signed last year, we do now have, we are no longer constrained by fare box recovery ratios. So that provides us with a little bit more flexibility than we've had in the past when conducting fare studies. As far as the study timeline, starting at the end, our hope is to have a recommendation ready for the board in the spring of next year. And then moving backwards, starting in the spring of this year and moving into the summer, we've had one round of community customer meetings, followed by our feedback panels. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we heard at those meetings a little bit later in the presentation. Later this month, we will also have our second series of community customer meetings, and we'll provide on that as well a little bit more information further in the presentation. And then towards late summer, fall, it's our hope to have some preliminary recommendations that we can bring out to the public, and then follow those up with a series of formal public hearings late this year into next year, with again putting us into board review and adoption in the spring timeframe of next year. Next slide, please. Also, as a reminder to the board, our overarching goal for the study is equity, and then of course followed by affordability and simplicity, which we kind of almost consider to be subsets of equity. Next slide. And the next. So the activities that we've had today, we've had extensive staff interviews, internal interviews with RTD groups and frontline employees. And then what we're calling our engagement milestone number 1, that was the series of public meetings that we had in April of this year. We've also launched a website, have social media out there as well. We've had our meetings with our community partner focus groups, which Carl will talk more about in just a moment. And we had an online survey as well as our feedback panels, along with some RTD workshops. And again, on all of these, we will provide more detail. And then our next round of public meetings coming up later this month. Next slide. We've had extensive internal focus groups, quite a breadth of just internally trying to figure out what can work or what is not working. You see on this particular slide all of the departments that we have met with. In addition, we've had even more in-depth focus groups with transit security, our bus operators, and customer care. And then you may notice also on the first column under our internal stakeholder interviews, in addition to the internal RTD departments, we have also met with Denver Human Services, since they do administer live passes for their clients. And then Carl Green is going to take over and discuss the next several slides.
Thank you, Chris. Before I begin, again, my name is Carl Green Jr., Acting Director of the Civil Rights Division, and some key operative words Chris has been mentioning throughout this as extensive, in-depth, robust, and as we were pulling together this slide deck to give this update as far as the system-wide fair study and equity analysis, that's exactly what we've been doing on the day-to-day. So it's always great to take a step back and give an overview of what we have done, especially as it relates to engagement milestone number 1, and just highlighting the fact of how does this relate specifically to our strategic plan on customer excellence and community value, and knowing the robust outreach that we've done, whether it's by virtue of our consultants or just thinking about the number of staff across the agency that is supporting this major project, especially when we're thinking about our our values of passion, diversity, collaboration, etc. This is paramount of our overall approach as it relates to this study. So I just wanted to open with that before I get into, if this would allow me to. Okay, perfect. So essentially, I'll be taking over as far as the outreach or engagement milestones, specifically for website and social media. I just want to emphasize the importance of RTD's approach of having, and I more or less call this the belly button as far as our outreach, to ensure that all of how we're communicating with our community and customers, ensuring that all of our opportunities for community involvement, our resources page that's filled with our fact sheets and frequently asked questions, is giving a holistic depiction of what we're doing throughout this study. So I just wanted to mention that we launched this back in April 1st of 2022. And then we also included a Spanish webpage. This is, again, there's a lot of first of its kind of this fair study and equity analysis project, where we actually have a landing page which is filled with a frequently asked questions. We've also have fact sheets, again, in the 4 prevalent languages within our service district, to include not only English, Spanish, but also Vietnamese and Chinese. And then as we're thinking about effective communications or language access, we deliberately created some translations instructions for the remaining 18 languages within our service district, to ensure if they need access or if they want to translate their web page, they can do so accordingly. And then I also wanted to highlight the fact of our overall approach to our social media campaign, where we utilize LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter to promote either the surveys, our customer and community meetings, and then rounding that out, in addition to the website portion of it, is leveraging our community partners to close the loop with customers and community members that don't necessarily have internet access. So them being the medium or the catalyst, if you will, to disseminate that information. So as you can see before the screen here, and I won't go over it specifically, but just wanted to give you some key website statistics as well as our social media statistics. I also got smart on some of the social media lingo by our digital communications manager and his teammates. So if there's any questions on what a unique view is and so forth, then I can provide that answer. But I just wanted to highlight the fact of our overall approach with respect to our website and social media. And it's going backwards. All right, next I wanted to highlight our customer and community meetings. Chris mentioned we have some coming up here at the tail end of June, but specifically for engagement milestone number 1, we had 2 virtual meetings, and one took place on April 21st in English, and then we had another one on April 28th, where we had 44 participants in English, and then we had about 54 participants in Spanish. So again, here it was multifaceted and as far as our approach to ensure that we're getting this information out, to ensure that our customer and community members are able to attend these events. And just from thinking about the number of feedback and discussions, I would count this as a big win for us as far as getting a better understanding of our customer pain points and the challenges that they face, and just by offering up different ideas for how we could potentially improve our fare structure. So again, here the recordings are posted online, and the meeting minutes are posted online in the event that the board would like to visit the website on the Fair Study and Equity Analysis project. Next, I wanted to highlight the community partner focus groups. So specifically, we walked the board during our last update, where we specifically partnered with 6 community-based organizations. And the best thing, or the value proposition of working with this community partners, is their close tie and relationships with the communities and customers that we serve. But specifically, we're able to take a deeper dive because of the trust that they already established with these customers and communities throughout our service district. So one big item that I wanted to highlight was that we had them lead focus groups, where specifically they recruited customers and communities throughout the service district to hold these focus group discussions. And we held trainings both in English and Spanish. And just by virtue of the feedback that they provided, that giving us basically a pat on the back on our deliberate approach to ensure that they had the resources and the information that they needed in order to carry out these focus groups. So we held those in person. They're both held in person and virtually, both English and Spanish, through the date range of May 9th to May 19th. And we had a great success outcome as far as the total number of participants, where we had 101 participants, 70 current customers, 17 previous customers, and 14 prospective customers. Next is the online survey. This is, again, a success as far as our outreach and ensuring that we have a good representation of our service district and the amount of feedback that we're receiving, where we garnered over 2,400 responses. We're currently in the mix of compiling those results and being able to do some crosstabs and analysis to inform engagement milestone 2, where just wanted to highlight the fact that we translated in Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. And we also, again, just highlighting the fact that our community partners were able to help promote the survey and recruit folks to be able to either complete the survey, and in addition to that, the focus groups. So one thing I wanted to highlight is, as it relates to our community partners, it's so great seeing the amount of email traffic that I've been receiving. So in addition to their constant feedback and reporting status updates of what they're doing, they're also sending pictures. So they're attending community events, they're at our bus stops, riding our buses, our fixed route vehicles, and so forth, and meeting directly with our customer and communities in order to garner that feedback that we need for this major project. And it keeps on going back every time I press that. All right, so as far as the feedback panel goes, just wanted to reiterate the fact that we had 3 feedback panels, one based on equity, past programs, and jurisdictions. And the purpose of this is more or less a filter approach, where we're collecting all the feedback that we can from our customer and communities through focus groups, surveys, customer and community meetings. And then based off of the compilation of the feedback that we receive, either their pain points and so forth, we're leveraging the equity, the 3 different feedback panels to garner their input on the feedback that we received to date, and sort of ground truthing what are the common themes, what are the challenges that our customers and communities are facing. So specifically, we had panel meetings. They met on May 11th and May 12th. And one beautiful thing that I would like to highlight is that our general manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, attended all 3, and they provided their opening, or she provided her opening remarks. And what I wanted to say with that is it really was a testament to showcase and to establish that legitimacy of these feedback panels as part of this project, but also to set the tone that the value proposition is that they're in a coveted role to help support what we're trying to achieve, especially as it relates to our strategic plan and ultimately what our fare structure will look like in 2023. So I wanted to highlight the fact that specifically for the equity feedback panel, what was different between the 2 is that they really surfaced those customer pain points, those challenges that are occurring in our communities for our customers. And they provided some noteworthy and notable ideas and suggestions, but also just feedback in general of where we can potentially make some modifications and changes to ultimately improve the overall experience for our customers. And then specifically, as what I wanted to mention regarding our feedback or our past program was they did emphasize a multitude of different things on how to improve our past programs, but specifically the challenge of the pay for all insurance model, as well as the EcoPass and some other sentiments. And then as far as the jurisdiction panel, focused on increasing access through more affordable fares, simpler past programs, and standardized discounts. And they noted the potential to supplement the RTD fare revenue. So lots of words coming, but I just wanted to highlight the fact this, as far as the overall themes, what you see before you on the screen is some of the reoccurring themes that we saw across the many different interval or facets of information that we receive on the number of different tactics that we move forward with as far as our engagement. So although there is only 6, 12, 11 different bullets, there was a myriad of feedback. And again, all this information is provided on our website, the meeting summaries of the customer meetings and the focus groups and the like. But I just wanted to highlight some of the information that we received, such as financially burdened customers should pay less than higher income customers. Fares are too expensive. There's confusion on the fare levels between local, regional, and airport, inconvenience to purchase passes by virtue of our customers, the inability to purchase monthly passes on our buses. And just another one that I'll just highlight is I wanted to highlight the potential fare study impacts on paratransit fares. So although we're specifically looking at our fixed route services, being inclusive in this regard, we're also exploring what the potential impacts that would be for our paratransit customers. And then just wanted to highlight the suggestions that we received here. Again, we received a lot of different suggestions, but these are at a high level ones that we've heard that were reoccurring, such as reducing or eliminating fares without reducing service, offer a single flat fare, decrease shorter trip fares, implement fare capping. We already let the cat out the bag. That's something that we'll be implementing here shortly in the months to come. Reward frequent travelers with discounts and reduce live discount fare barriers, provide college student discount. And then lastly, identify new fare revenue sources outside of our fares to offset the cost for our customers. So with that being said, I'll now pass it back over to Chris. Chris, you're on mute.
If you're
sorry. The next slides will discuss our next steps as we move forward. So we've taken a lot of the information that Carl discussed that we received from both the community meetings as well as our feedback panels, and we've taken that, synthesized the information, and we've brought that back to our internal stakeholders and have reviewed that and tried to then further the discussion by talking about some of the chief components of the fare study, which include the overall fare pricing, distance-based fares, pass programs, discount fares and technology, and using that information that we have received from those groups to start to come up with the initial formulation of potential high-level potential alternatives that we can bring to the public at our next round of engagement, which we've been referring to as milestone number 2. And our next slide will show what's coming up. So we do have a series of customer community meetings later this month. First one being on June 23rd. That will be in English, and then June 29th, and that meeting will be in Spanish. So it'll be just like the same structure that we had with our April meetings. Those will be followed by our feedback panels. And again, you'll see the pattern here where we go out to the community first, get their input on these ideas, then take that up to the next level to our feedback. So as we've said before, we really want this to be a customer-driven process, which is why we're starting each one of the phases with the community meetings first, as opposed to going back to the communities after we've already come up with ideas on our own. We will also be reaching some of the pre-existing RTD committees, including ACPD and APAC, and then we will also be going to CAC later in the month. Now, in order to register for the community meetings, these again will be Zoom meetings like we did in April. You do need to register online. The webpage for the fare study equity analysis, if you just Google RTD fare study, it's the first hit that comes up. Click onto that, and on the main page, we do have the registration for both of those meetings. So with that in mind, we'd be happy to try to respond to any questions, comments, concerns that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. Thank you, Mr. Green. And apologies, I'm tripping over my words as we started this. I would just like to say, yes, in fact, congratulations to Mr. Green for being our acting director of the Civil Rights Division. So it was well earned, and certainly glad to see you in the position. So congrats. So with that, I'll go ahead and open the floor to any questions or comments that we might have in response to the presentation. All right, I figured we might have a few. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for Mr. Green, if I could. Do you have a sense from the data that you gathered and as summarized in your chart that there was a significant number of people who said that they preferred better service over lower fares, because that flies in the face of what a number of people love to tell us? So just give me some sense, please, if you can, as to the robustness of that response.
Chair Davidson, may I?
Please.
Yes,
Go ahead,
great question, Director Tisdale. So as I noted, just by virtue of the customer and community meetings and the focus groups, that has been some reoccurring themes. But one thing that I wanted to highlight as we're compiling the data of the survey, that's when we can really actually ground truth and put the numbers together on the number count, or be able to quantify the numbers. So at this stage in the game, we haven't necessarily quantified it, but that has been a reoccurring theme, and that has, as we're progressing throughout this project, is the next stage of the engagement milestone is the conceptual options. So a lot of that feedback has helped informed our overall approach moving forward. So as we progress and we receive the feedback from the survey, that is something that we could better respond to that question at a later point, but I appreciate the question.
Thank you, appreciate that. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Director. Director Cook, please.
Thank you. One quick question, and then will there be, do you anticipate you'll make any modifications to the ECO and EcoPass programs? Is that part of the scope of your work there, Carl or Chris or whoever?
Yes, Director Cook, this is Chris Quinn. And short answer, yes, we are looking at all the past programs, and we do in fact have a past program feedback panel as well. And the ECO-NECO is one of the items that we are looking at.
Missed that. And then on the feedback panels, it said on the jurisdiction one, it said city. I assume that's city and county of Denver, or were there multiple city representatives? How was that on the feedback panel?
Yes, nearly all of the districts and local jurisdictions are represented in that city, county, as well as Dr. Cog.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
And one thing that I wanted to highlight too that I omitted was, as far as our survey goes, if you look at the number across the district of the different counties, what we're looking to do as part of our our fall survey, the 3 different counties where there's not as much representation, we're going to be moving forward with paid social media advertisements to ensure that we have a more representative number on those 3 counties like Weld. So just wanted to raise that up as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thanks for that comment, Mr. Green. That's a smart move. That's cool. Further questions, comments? Right. Well, I'd just like to say I really appreciate the customer centricity on this, and also it's good to see some of the feedback and data. I know, like many of us, we have plenty of anecdotes from folks we hear from and experiences we have out on the system, and I know there's quite a few themes represented here, from confusion of maps and confusion around some of the fares. So anyway, it's nice to see some of that, getting some data behind it and coming direct from customers. So thank you for the thorough presentation and update. We all look forward to next steps, and I know everyone's very interested in this throughout the community, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. So appreciate all you're doing and the time frame in which you're doing it. With that, we're going to go ahead and move to other matters. Go ahead and ask directors, are there any other matters to be discussed at the committee this evening? Yes, Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. I recently watched a television piece that featured Jamie Dimon with JP Morgan, and he indicated that there was a fiscal storm headed our way that was the likes that none of us have ever seen. And I just wonder what RTD is doing to get ready for some of the things that we're going to probably see in the coming months and years. For example, how do we deal with 8% inflation on an ongoing basis? And on Forbes cover today, it says, get ready for $8 gasoline. Well, that's good and bad news for RTD. The $8 gasoline will probably improve ridership, but we're also going to have to buy more expensive gasoline for our fleet that doesn't use diesel. And of course, diesel will go up as well as gasoline. I'm just concerned that we don't want to sit around and wait until we're already, knee deep to start to respond to this. We need to start thinking about what are these major trends that we see coming on, and how are we going to respond to them so that we're able to do that in a timely manner and try to, cut back on the impact that it's going to have on RTD in the future. Thanks.
Yeah, Director Broom, thank you very much for the question. Certainly a good one. I mentioned before, well, we all don't have our crystal balls, but there's some interesting dynamics. When was the last time that unemployment was under 4% and inflation over 4%, and that wasn't followed by something rough? So appreciate the question. And Mr. McLeod, if you're available, I'd certainly open the floor to you to make any comments on this matter, particularly as it relates to our gas contracts and any other things you may want to touch upon related to the question.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been discussing, General Manager Johnson and myself have been discussing some of these issues related to gas and fuel prices. We have been discussing some additional strategies that we might be interested in. We've engaged with our municipal advisory firm, Hilltop, to look at some potential financial instruments. Currently, we contract for gas or for fuel prices for about $9 million of diesel fuel at $2.30 per gallon. Obviously, those prices have almost doubled. We're looking at additional strategies to possibly protect us on the upside, but then possibly take advantage on the low side. There's a cost associated with that. We're investigating that. I know on our bus operations side, one of the things that we've done is we entered a contract before to purchase buses to recognize those bus prices before some of these inflationary impacts took hold. We've also asked the CU Leads team to give us a sales and use tax forecast in August as opposed to September, so we can start reviewing that information and look at the economic landscape, as well as tee them up to have possibly monthly meetings thereafter to keep a close eye on where things are headed. And obviously, a lot of our expenses are contractually based. So it depends, in terms of our wages. Some of our wages are contractually based, as well as some of our contracted services are contractually based with fixed prices over a period of time. But definitely a concern, General Manager Johnson's and myself. We've had some preliminary discussions about high impact areas and what we can do about it. But we are keeping a close eye on that.
Thank you. I know there's no exact answer to these questions, but it's certainly something that we should be thinking about and be ready to respond to.
Yeah, thank you, Director Broom, for raising it. Really, truly appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. McLeod, for commenting on some of the discussions and strategies. Appreciate the proactive thinking here. I know we do use quite a bit of fuel. I think you had shared with us that it's on the order of 8.5 million right now, typically 10 million gallons. So appreciate the question and the comment, and a lot to be thinking about here. I certainly am appreciative, again, that we've done some work even out of tough times in COVID to increase our net position, decrease debt, because I think we got to buckle up a little bit here. Director Broom, does that address your comments this evening?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, duly noted. That's a long-term topic here we need to stay on top of. So thank you for raising it. Director Catlin, I see that your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with regard to Director Broom's question, I had asked the same question at our planning meeting, and I was somewhat comforted by your comment, Mr. McLeod, that it's the percentage of our overall budget is relatively small when it comes to fuel. So even doubling of that cost would not have a huge impact on the on the overall percentage of our budget. Can you tell me what those figures were again?
Yes, thank you, Director Catlin. So correct, between fuel, diesel fuel and gas. So diesel fuel fuels the majority of our buses. We also purchase quite a bit of gas for our support vehicles, as well as our cutaways that handle our ADA services, as well as FlexRide. We pay pump prices for those gas prices currently for unleaded. That's approximately, we budgeted approximately $7 million for gas in 2022. And then on the diesel fuel side, we budgeted approximately $18 to $19 million. So combined about $25 million. Sounds like a big number, and with doubling of gas prices, if we paid at the pump, it obviously costs us approximately $25 million more than what we were paying in 2022. But that figure is actually, it makes up 4% of our operating expenses. So an additional $25 million would hurt. Definitely, we have other expenditures, inflationary pressures on parts and supply chains, et cetera, that we'd have to consider. But we do have some levers we can pull to control some of those, but definitely it could be a big concern moving forward.
Thank you very much, Director Catlin, for the further question on that, and Mr. McLeod for the detailed answer. Yeah, a lot coming our way. And as we talk about, I would just remind everybody too, I unfortunately was unable to attend the Tabor ad hoc meeting, but I do know that we had that this week, and I know that 2024 ratchet down is when we'll face ratchet down from the end of the T-Rex bonds. So all the more when we think about that the worst case scenario is facing that when we have down years. And so it's certainly, shouldn't be lost on us that we're talking about potential down years. Again, none of us can predict here, but while we're also looking at, facing Tabor. So something for this committee to watch, our ad hoc committee on Tabor to watch, and so forth. Other matters to come before the committee this evening? All right, seeing none, I will just let everyone know that the next meeting date will be Tuesday, July 12th, 2022. It'll be the next Finance and Planning Committee. Seeing no other discussion, we will adjourn at 8:31 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you sincerely, everybody here, for the discussion and collaboration. Have a good night.
Thank you.